Is this kind of physiological identification a kind of sex that is opposite to men, or another aspect of an idea that acknowledges this kind of identity?
I feel that sex, this concept, has two ways of understanding it. One is our so-called physiological sex. As for myself, my physiological sex is without a doubt female. In addition, there's also a socially created conception of sex, gender. I feel that when using the concept of gender, I am also a woman. However, this concept of gender is in contrast to concepts of gender in traditional society. That is to say, in my understanding of modern society, the concept of gender includes behavior, value, and thoughts. My understanding about gender differs from traditional requirements for women. I continually explore these ideas. But there is one point that is extremely clear. I think, at the very least, I have differences with traditional concepts of gender and sex, behavior, and towards traditional women's beliefs.
价值取向思想层面，我对我自己的社会性别的认定是有别于传统对女性的这个要求的。那么至于是什么呢？我在不断的探索摸索当中，但是有一点非常明确，我想有别于传统的性别观念和性别行为吧，对传统妇女的那种认定。
So, could we call you a new woman?
可以。
Yes.
可以。
What term for feminist, 女权主义者 or 女性主义者 best describes you?
I think I'm a 女权主义者. So in my last answer, I wanted to explain. What kind of role should women take on in society, or what kind of role should they take on in their families? They should have a recognition of themselves, have their own judgment and beliefs and their own pursuits. I believe I am motivated by this kind of goal. Moreover, I think this kind of goal should include equality for the two sexes and women's independent social identity. This has become a goal for all of us to pursue. I feel that if you have this kind of idea of women, you are a feminist, 女权主义者. I'm working very hard for these goals, so I feel that I'm a feminist.
有这样一种理念的女性是女权主义者，我也在努力当中，所以我也认为我是女权主义者。
You think that you're a feminist. When did such feminist ideas or goals begin to emerge?
对，我记得
I remember it was probably in 1996. I wrote down a sentence and gave it to my friend. She was my friend and also my colleague. This sentence summarized our relationship and the evolution of the influence that she had on me. The sentence I said to her was that you have changed me from a natural feminist into a conscious feminist. That is to say, she changed me from a spontaneous feminist into a conscious feminist.
就是说，你把我从一个天然的女权主义者变成了一个有自觉意识的女权主义者。
您这天然女权主义者怎么理解呢？
对，天然的女权主义者就是我自己就认为是没有那么明确的这种意识，但是呢，有一种强烈的压迫感。作为女性，
What do you mean by spontaneous feminist?
我体会到一种。
I was definitely a spontaneous feminist. I feel that I did not have a very clear awareness, but I had a very intense feeling of oppression. As a woman, I experienced a feeling of being oppressed. I experienced a kind of depression. I experienced a certain kind of feeling of unfairness. but I did not have the words and the ability to express this.
的这个成长这个经历，这
如果
种压抑
对，
I found myself
如果
in
我
a
要
state
是
of being oppressed.
那个回顾一下我自
I
己
have
的
had
那
this
个
kind of
童
feeling of
年呢，
oppression since I was
其实我
young.
的这种压抑感是从我的童
Moreover,
年就
I
开始
feel
了。
that this kind of feeling of oppression is one which is part of the life experiences of being a
两个
woman.
孩子，一个男孩儿，一个女孩儿。我们两个人年龄差着4岁。那么我们小的时候呢，因为我的母亲是一个职业妇女，她没有时间来照顾我们，
Can you
那么就
talk
把
a
我
bit
们
about your
两个人，我
experiences
和我
when
哥
you
哥
were growing up?
送到了上海。我
If
的
I
爷
look
爷
back at
奶
my
奶家。
childhood,
那么我的
actually,
爷爷奶
this
奶
kind
呢是
of
一个
feeling
老
of
式
being
家庭
oppressed
的
started as a
成
kid.
员，所以他
At
们
that time, my family was perhaps
对待
representative
我
of a
和对待
typical
我哥
family.
哥的
Two kids,
做法
one boy and
是
one girl.
完全不一样的。
My brother and
那
I
么
were 4
那
years
时候我
apart.
可能只有3、4
Because
岁，
my mom was a professional
他们
woman,
怎么
when we were
区别
small,
对
she
待
did
呢
not have a lot of
就
time
是
to take
我
care
哥
of
哥可
us.
以，
So she took my older
白
brother
天
and
都
me
在
to
外面
Shanghai
玩
to
儿，
live with our
或者他
grandparents.
去上学，或者
My
上
grandparents
学
were
回来
both
就
very
在
old
外
fashioned,
面玩儿。
so they
而
treated my
我
brother
的
and me
奶奶
completely differently.
从来就是
At
限
that
制
time, I
我
was
到白
probably
天在
only
外面玩
about
的
3  or
时间。
4.
然后
How did
他
they
就
treat us
要求
differently?
我跟着他。
My brother could
早上
play
出去买
outside
菜，
all day
我们
long.
4点钟，
Once
就是
school
当年那
started,
个生活
as
非
soon
常
as he
的艰
came
苦。
home, he could play
城
outside.
市人如果要
But my
想
grandmother always
买到
restricted my outside
足
playtime.
够的那
Also,
个蔬
she
菜
made me
和
go
肉
with
类
her
的
to buy
话，就得
groceries
早
in the
上4点
mornings.
钟去菜场排队。
At that
尽
time,
管
life
我
was
很
very
小，
difficult.
我不会
Since we lived in the
做
city,
买这个
if you
动
wanted to
作，
buy
但
enough
是我
vegetables
在
and
那
meat,
儿可以
you
站一
had
个
to go
队，
to the market at
排一个
4 in
位
the
子。
morning to
那
wait
么如
in
果我
lines.
4点钟跟着他去，
Despite
那
the
么
fact
我
that I
可以
was
在
really
蔬菜的
young,
这个
too small to
摊
go and
上
buy things on my
占着
own,
一个位子，
I could
他
still
可以
hold
到
a
肉
place
类
in
的那
line.
个摊上去占着一个位子，然后
If
等
I
他买
went
完
with
了，
my
他再过
grandmother at 4 in
来，
the morning,
把
I
我
could
替下
stand
去，
in
然
line
后
in
他
front
再
of the
买，
vegetable
他再买
stall.
买。
She
我
could
现
then
在
go
都
and
记
stand
得，
in the
就
meat
是
line.
我在4、5 岁
After
的
she
时候，
finished buying
就
meat, she would come
每
and take
天
the
早
place
晨
that I had been
3、4
holding
点
for
钟
her
跟着我
in
的
the
奶奶
vegetable line.
去
I
菜场
remember
排
that
队，
when I was 4 or 5
替
years
她排
old,
队。
every
当一
day
个
at 3 or 4 in the morning, I
就
would go
是
with my
那个
grandmother to
替
the
替
market
身
to stand
哎。
in line and hold a
那
place
么
for her.
这种事情，我哥哥是
My
从来不
brother
做的。
never had to do this kind
跟
of
他买
thing.
完菜回来，
After we came back from the
我
market,
就
my
他
grandmother would
会
ask
要
me
求
to help
我
her clean
跟着
and
他
prepare the
摘
food.
菜，就学非常
As I
简
got
单
a
的
little older,
啊，摘
she
菜。
wanted me to learn
然
how to
后呢，等我
sew
再大
and
一
make
点的时候，
clothes,
他就要
stitch,
求
thread a
我
needle, etc.
学那个缝纫，
Later,
啊
I
就是
could do
缝
very
缝
basic
缝衣
needlework.
服，学什么那个
My grandmother
纳
felt that only by learning
纳箭
these
头
kinds
啊
of skills
穿
could a
针引
woman have the
线啊
possibility of being
然后
desirable
就
for marriage.
做最基本的针线活儿。
She made me study
然
these
后
things
他
when
的
I was
唯一
4 or
的依据
5.
就是说，一个女人要学会这些
I
东
felt
西，
this
以后
treatment
才能
was
嫁得
really
出去。
unfair.
所以
Another
他从4、5岁
example
开
I
始
can
就
think
要
of
这
how
个
we
东
were
西。
treated differently concerned
那
eating.
么我就觉得就很
At
不
the
公啊。而
table,
另外
my
还有一个
grandparents
就是他们那
always
个做法，
expected
比
me
如
to
说
be
在那个
self-controlled.
饭桌上吃饭，
That is to say, I should be sure to allow others to eat
能够
first
自
and
律，
to
就
eat
是
the
说要
best
把好吃
foods.
的省给别人吃
She。taught me that this was
这是做
considered
人
to
的
be
一
a
个美德。
person's
他
virtue.
教育我的时候是这做人
So
的
I
美
should
德，
allow the
所以要让
elderly
家
of the
长先
house
吃，
and
要
others to
让
eat
别人先
first.
吃。但是他们从来没有
However,
让我
they
哥哥
never
这
made
样
my
做。
brother do this.
相反的是，他
On
们
the
不断的往
contrary,
我哥
they
哥
would
的碗里
always
加
put the
菜。
best foods in my brother's bowl.
然后呢，就是最极端的，就让我最不能那个接受的一次，就是有一次我们就一块儿出去，那个有一天就是我的奶奶就突然就说，我们出去吃雪糕吧。冬
I still
天啊，
remember the incident
对于
that
我们
was
小
the
孩来
most
讲，就是
extreme
冬
example
天
of
能
being
出去吃
treated
雪糕
differently
是
because I
特
was a
别大
girl.
的一次
One
享
time we
受。
all went
然后
out
我就兴
together.
冲冲的就跟着他们
My
去了。
grandmother said,
去了以后呢，
"Why don't we go out for
没
ice
想到
cream?"
我奶奶
which
给我
during
哥哥
winter
买
for
了一个
us
雪
kids
糕，
was a
给我
rare
买了一个
treat.
4分钱的冰棍儿。
I excitedly went with them.
然
To
后我
my
当时我就
surprise,
真的是
My grandmother brought my brother an ice cream, but bought me a 4-cent popsicle. I was really angry, so I asked her why I did not get an ice cream too. At that time, an ice cream cost about 12 cents, while a popsicle cost about 3 to 4 cents. She just said that of course he should have a rich creamy ice cream because he was a boy. I will never be able to forget those kinds of feelings of being treated unfairly. I also feel my brother was at ease with being treated like this. I probably will never be able to forget his obliviousness and unconscious acceptance. He never called into question why his little sister had a popsicle, but he got to eat an ice cream. When I recall that time, I still feel no pleasure in eating a popsicle in winter. I was definitely affected by this experience because each time I think of this incident, I feel a kind of hurt. I definitely do not have good memories of this. This hurt is partially because my grandparents so openly treated me differently. My brother completely accepted this. He felt that this was natural. After all, he was a boy. He did not think that he was 4 years older than me, and as my older brother, he should take care of me. But he did not, and that day he just calmly ate his ice cream. I regretted for many years that at the time I did not throw away the popsicle. But I loved to eat too much, so I was humiliated, yet I ate the popsicle. After eating it, I have always regretted it. Why did I accept that kind of treatment? I still ate the popsicle, and since that time, have felt regret every time I eat a popsicle. At that time, I felt that I did not have any strength of character. I had no strong will. I should have thrown the popsicle away to show my grandmother that I was upset and that I absolutely could not accept being treated like that. But I did not because kids love food too much. During that time, we often went hungry and did not have enough clothes to wear. So even being able to eat a popsicle in winter was still a luxurious treat. So I still ate the popsicle. For many years after that incident, I was upset with myself. That kind of experience made me feel very lucky that I did not grow up at my grandparents' house. Once I started elementary school, I returned to live with my parents. My parents were from the generation who were educated after liberation. More or less, they had a new perspective. My brother stayed with our grandparents and received their unending devotion and love. When I returned to my parents, it was like I became an only child. Actually, my parents did not have a chance to treat me differently than my brother or discriminating against me. So I received their full attention and their affection. At that time, I experienced real love and caring and remember this as a very happy period in my life. I stayed with my parents continually until I graduated from high school and went to college. As a kid, I really had a carefree childhood. At that time, we did not have any academic or test pressure, and my parents really loved me. My grades were pretty good, and I had a rather outgoing personality. I feel that as a girl, I did not experience overt oppression. Today, as I recall this time period, I feel that I was pretty carefree. Also, I did not feel inferior to boys in any way. So I still had a kind of self-confidence and feeling of self-pride. However, I feel that when I attended university, I was oppressed again. Dating in college brought me a kind of depression and confusion. Most girls had boys trying to date them. Having boys like them became a kind of recognition. But I was not particularly well liked by the boys. Maybe it was because I was too bold and too unconcerned about dating. And on top of this, I was not very attractive. I felt the guys were indifferent to me and rejected me.
Was this in any way related to your studies?
It did not have anything to do with my schoolwork. Actually, I was not a very outstanding student. I attended 6 years of university, 4 years for my undergraduate degree, and then 2 more years of graduate work. During these 6 years of school, I was very depressed and had a really negative perception of myself. However, at that time, I did not understand. I just felt that this was my mistake or problem. It was because I was not pretty or because I was not gentle or caring enough to attract boys. So I was continually dissatisfied with myself. Boys did not treat me well, but I also had a negative perception of myself.
Did this kind of negativity come from the way boys spoke to you, or
it came from their eyes?
the way they looked at you?
Yes, it came from their attitude towards me and the way that they treated me. Maybe I felt that as a woman I did not have any value. Moreover, I was an extreme case. I was the only girl that I knew at the time who was not pursued by any guys. I always felt confused. I never had guys ask me out on dates. If I was ugly, then... But it seemed that other girls who looked like me had dates. This was my big concern during my time as a young adult. I thought about this a lot, but could not come up with an explanation. I could not help reaching the same conclusion that I was in this situation because I was not attractive enough. So I felt even more strongly that it was unfair. Why did a girl's value only come from her looks? Of course, there are two problems with this kind of thinking. First, actually women's value does not come from men. At the time, I did not realize this point. I felt that if I did not have a man trying to date me, then I was worthless. Second, why is a woman's value so closely related to her appearance? I thought perhaps it was not only about my appearance, but also about my personality. I studied myself and reached the conclusion that perhaps I was not warm enough, was not flirtatious enough, or was not caring enough. I continually searched for flaws in myself. I even thought about changing and trying to cater more to what men wanted. Of course, first, I was not successful at changing, and second, I could not cater to any man. This kind of self-negation and self-repression was to a rather severe degree. So, today, I still have a deep scar in my heart that I have not been able to completely rid myself of.
当然，第一改变的也不成功，第二呢也没迎合到什么男生，
那你主动？
但是就是这种自我否定和自我压抑，就是这种压抑的程度是相当深的，可以说今天在我的心理深处也有负面的烙印，我到今天没有完全摆脱。
但是当时的时候，你有没有过一种主动的
没有。
去想？
你主动的是吗？主动去追求？
对，
没有，因为我觉得我不会，主要是因为我们这种文化里面也没有教育过我怎么去吸引男孩，然后怎么去勾引男的，我也不会。另外当时还有那种意识形态的。
No, I did not ask guys out because I felt I could not. More importantly, I was never taught how to approach guys or flirt with guys. I also did not know how to seduce men. In addition, at that time, most people thought a good girl would not chase a guy. I still wanted to be a good person. I also felt that I did not have those kind of capabilities. Seemingly, this was a skill that you had to be born with. So first, I did not dare to. Second, I did not know how. So this was my situation. So actually, my sense of inferiority had already been formed. It took away my courage to be proactive. At that time, I just thought that I would passively accept my fate. If a man tried to date me, I would guarantee that he became the world's happiest man. Really, I would go so far as to swear that those guys were all blind. I was such a good person. Actually, as a human being, I believed in myself. I felt that I was very kind-hearted, very friendly, and also very smart. Also, I had my own ideas and way of thinking. But I did not know why these values were not appreciated. Actually, these guys had not seen my real value. So in my heart, I pledged that I would make the first guy to court me the world's happiest man. I quietly swore this to myself. Actually, what I think should be stressed is this kind of emotional condition. Since I did not have gender consciousness, I was confused and suffered greatly. This was very depressing and negative and was really harmful for a girl as she is growing up. Why should women have to deal with this kind of social and psychological pressure? Isn't this really unfair to women? I feel that men who had a similar character and appearance as me would feel very differently. At that time, there were not any boys who were interested in dating me. Many girls told me that if I were a guy, they would definitely want to date me. I have always been rather social and friendly, so I have often had to glue the whole groups together. I always had a lot of friends. All of them were girls, none were boys. So I thought that if I were a guy, I would be really popular with girls. Why? Simply because of my gender was I treated so differently in society and human relationships. Why is this happening this way? I started to ponder this question, but I had no answer and no conclusion. It was in this mixed-up state of mind that I graduated.
只是因为性别的原因，为什么就让我的就是说在别人就社会对我认可或者两性关系的认可当中，就一个天上一个地下呢？是什么造成了这个东西？我就开始思考，但是没有答案，没有结论，就这样糊里糊涂就毕业了。
Until 1996, you...
No, I graduated in 1988.
No, until 1996, when a friend said something.
In 1988, I graduated. Then I went to the Ford Foundation to work. At Ford, I started to do development work. This kind of work was really important because it sought to bring a gender perspective to the process of development. So I got to know gender, this kind of method of work, and this concept. Then I was exposed to feminism. Why do I say that my friend or my colleague had such a big influence on me? For a time, we worked together at the Ford Foundation. She was my boss, Mary Ann Burris. I was her assistant. Together, we worked on a project that dealt with women's reproductive health. This gave me the opportunity to begin to learn about feminist theory. I wanted to understand gender and wanted to know how to use a gender approach to do development work. So first, I needed to understand the theoretical background of feminist theory. I started to read books. When I was reading, I realized that I wished I had discovered this concept earlier.
Did you read books in English or in Chinese?
Chinese. Most were translations.
Translations?
Yes, translations. Afterwards, I made some new friends. These friends were all Western women, including my boss, Lisa, and Ceci. Later, Lisa came to the Ford Foundation to work. We would continuously discuss what exactly our experiences and things that puzzled us were, and how we could explain them. Later, I discovered that only feminism, this kind of explanation, would satisfy me. Moreover, its explanations really addressed issues that I felt were important and my concerns. I was convinced by the logic of this theory. It gave me the feeling of being suddenly enlightened. So I felt that as a woman, it was as if I were born again and I could conquer the feelings of depression and negativity that I had experienced as a young person. I finally emerged from the shadows, from life's shadows.
After you took these steps, how did you further develop? How did you personally and institutionally put these ideas into practice?
My participation in work related to women's movements was inseparable from my career. I was lucky enough to work at the Ford Foundation. Our responsibilities included promoting the development of local women's non-governmental organizations. Also, we promoted women's theoretical research and the development of local women's activities. Since I was doing this kind of work, I needed to study. So, at the same time, I also came into contact with some women's activists and some feminist scholars. Meeting them was part of my continual process of learning and improvement. Also, I organized a small group. It was in 1992 when we organized the East Meets West group. Actually, it was Lisa who initiated the idea for this group. That year, she was doing consulting work at the Ford
我们就
Foundation.
组织了一个东西方小
She
组。
was representing
其实这个
Ford
东西方
to
小组
help
的发起
China's
人呢是我和
non-governmental
那个 Lisa。
women's groups
当
make
年呢，他
arrangements
在
for
这
the
个基
Fourth
金会
World
找到了一
Conference on
个
Women.
顾问的工作，就是代表负责
Lisa
基
was
金
an
会协助
activist
中
and
国
a
的
scholar
妇
who
女
really understood the international women's
筹办
movement.
第4次世界妇女大会。那么
After she
Lisa
started
作为
this
一
work,
个
She came to realize
非常了解
Chinese
国
women
际妇女运
activists
动
and
的
theories about women
这
in
样一个
China
积极分子，
lagged
他
behind
也
the
是一个
West
学
in
者。
terms of
他当
development
时
of
接
concepts
下来这
and
个
work
工作以
methods
后，
at that time.
他就知道，就是中国的妇女积极分子以及中国的妇女理论和当时的那个西方的这个理论，在概念方面，在工作方法方面都有巨大的差距。
Moreover, differences also existed in our
对于妇女
understandings of the most pressing
面临的
issues facing these
最
women.
大的比
Chinese
如说
women's understandings and
最
Western
急迫
women's
的
understandings
目
were
标
not the same.
是什么？
Thus, Lisa felt that
中
a
国
huge
妇女
disparity
的理
existed.
解和西方妇女的理解都不
What
一
should
样
we，do?
他就觉得这里面存在着很大的差距。那么怎么
At
办？
the
就
time
是
of the
说
1995 World
年
Women's Conference,
世界妇女大
Chinese
会开的
women
时
would
候
have to face
中
the
国妇女
international
必然要
women's movement.
面对国际妇女运
If we
动。
went to participate in the conference with such a big disparity
如
in
果我们
understanding,
就带着这么大的一
we
个
might
差
have
距去参与的话，
actually, it would be very likely that we
我们
could
会
face
有
conflict, misunderstandings,
很可能
or
会产
even
生冲
feelings
突，
of
或者产生
disappointment.
误解，或者产生
So we thought
失
about
落
what
感
we
吧。
should do.
那么我们就想到，那我们能
As
做
a
什
group
么？
of young
作为
women
当时我们
professionals
作为
in
一个
Beijing,
一群
what
年
should
轻
what
的
could we do?
女性在北京职业
So
妇
I
女，
felt we should have
我
a
们
small
做什么？
translating
后来我
group
就
that
觉
could
得我们应
translate
该
and
开一个小
introduce
组，
some
能
Western
够
feminist theories and
在
writings into
世界妇女
China
大会前
2 or
2-3
3 years
年，就
before
把
the
一些西
conference.
方的女权主义的理论文章翻译到中国来，
This would allow Chinese women to learn about Western feminism,
就是西
what
方
they
的
paid
女权
close
主义，
attention to,
他们
what
都在
issues
关
they
注什么、
explored,
探讨什么，他们都有什
what
么样
kind
的
of theoretical
理论概念
concepts, as well as
还有
analytical
那个分
frameworks
析
they
框
held,
架
and so on.
等等吧。所以呢，我们就
So we
组成了
created
一
a
个叫
small
东西
group
方
called the East Meets West
翻译小组。
Translation Group.
那么这个小组呢是由中国
This small
和
group consists of Chinese and
外
foreign
国女
women.
性
We
组
were
成
all
的，我
bilingual.
们都是双语。
Every 2 or
那
3
么我
weeks
们每
we
一
would
次
meet.
的那个就是2-3个星期，我们就会聚一次。
Our main
我
work
们
was
的主要
translation.
工作呢是做翻
But
译，
after we did the
但是翻译
translations,
之后
we
我
would
们
also
还会
hold
讨论，
discussions.
因为翻译不仅是一个语
Since
言的翻译，
translation is
其实
not
是一
only
种文化的
linguistic,
翻译，
but
是
also
一种
cultural
概
and
念的翻译
conceptual.
那么我们在这个翻译过程当中就
In
发
this
现有
process
很
of
多的概
translation, we
念是
discovered
中
that
国
many
的
concepts did
话语
not
里面都
exist
没
in the
有
Chinese
的。
language.
那么我们就要怎么
So we had to
怎
figure
么
out
把
how to
它最
translate
恰当的
appropriately into
翻译
language
成
that
中国
Chinese
妇女
women
能够
would
懂的
understand.
这些
In
词
other
汇，
words,
或者说我们怎么创造新的词
we
汇。
had to figure out how to create
这
a
个
new
就是需
vocabulary.
要我们有很多的时间来讨论。
Discussions about
那
this
么这
issue
个
took a
讨
lot of
论
time.
的过程实际
This
上是我们
process
自
of
己自我
discussion
成长的过
actually
程，
was a
也
process
是
of
我
our
们向西方
self-development
的
and a
妇女
process of
来
learning from
了
Western
解
women about
这
the
些
history of social
概念
development
背后的社
behind these
会
concepts.
发展这个
For
社会
example,
发展
when we came across the word gender, we felt that it was a very
路径的
difficult word to
这么一个
translate.
过程。比如说像我
We
们
had
遇
to
到
ask
尖
someone
的
to,
这样一个词
to explain to us
哎，我 们
exactly what
觉
gender
得
meant.
很
We
难
had
翻
to
译的
ask
时
people
候，
to
我
recommend
们必
readings
定
to us so
要
that we
有人
could,
来给我
at
们解
least
释
roughly,
这个
understand the
尖的
meaning
到
of
底是什
gender.
么东西。有人要来给我们介
So
绍，
it
我们
seemed
应
that
该
we were
看
only
哪
doing
方面的书，
translation work.
我们才能够最粗显的了
But
解
actually,
就是尖的
it was a process of learning,
内涵实质
of
是什么。
self-reflection
所以我们的这个
and self-understanding.
翻译，就是说从表面来看，我们仅仅是一个翻译的工作，实际上是我们一个学习的过程，自我反思和自我认识的一
In
个
the
过程。
process of learning, as these new theories and ideas were continually
学习
introduced,
的这个过程当
we
中，
felt that suddenly
随
we were
着
becoming
这些理
enlightened.
论和概念不断
In
的
other words,
被介
we
绍
found
进
these
来的
concepts,
时候，
for
我
example,
们自己
gender
有一
roles,
种
gender
疑惑来
orientation,
看，
gender
就发
relations,
现
gender
哇，
power
原来
relations,
这些东
etc.
西能够那
They
么
were like
生动
keys
的
that released us from
比
the
如说
things
像
that held us
性
down.
别角色、性别角色定位，
They allowed me to truly
就
look
是
at
性
myself as a woman, my position in society, and what kind of relation that I had with men.
就是一个一个特别灵
How should I
验的钥匙
reevaluate this kind of relation so that I would
我们以
not
前
lose my
就是
own
特别
guiding
困惑的
principles and my
我们的
values?
心灵的锁枷锁
we slowly
就一
raised
把一把
this
的
kind
就
of
起来了，
consciousness.
就让我
So I
真正的
believe
看
this
到
was a
了我
process
自
of
己
personal
作为一个女
development.
性在社会当中的一个位置，以及我和男性之间是一种什么样的一种关系。那么，我应该来如何重
There were
新来
many
界定
people who participated.
这种关系，使我自己不
Our
失
group had
去
activities
我的一个中
from
心位置
1992
和
to
自身的
1999.
那种价值
No, until
本位。
2000. 8
就这种
years.
意识才慢慢
Our
被提升
members
起
were
来。
constantly changing, but usually we maintained about 20 to
所以
30
我觉得
people.
这也是我自己一个
When
成
we
长的过
started,
程。
we only had about
有多少
15
人参
people.
加？我们这个小组
Members
从
introduced their friends
88
into the
年
group, and we also went
一
out to
直活
recruit
动
women
到
who shared our
19
goals.
从88年
We maintained our group for
从
7 or 8
92年
years.
一直活动到1999年，一直活动到2000年。所以我们有8年时间，我们的人不断在变，但是我们平时一般保持在20-30个人。开始的时候我们
The
只有10
long-term
个人。
members have all become the
反正大家
leaders
都
of
是
their own
呃
women's
互相
groups
朋友
or
介绍啊
governmental institutions,
那个
or have become
我
leading
们也自己
feminist
到外面
scholars.
去找一些能够跟我们有志同道合的这种观念的女孩啊，我们也把她们都拉进来，然后就坚持了7-8年。
For example,
那么
Fang Yuan,
就是
Wu
时
Wei,
间
Liu Bohong,
活动的
and Zhang
长
Lixi
的
were all
这
members
些
of our group.
成员吧，
Today, they have already
今
become
天
experts in this
看
field
来
or
已经成为
prominent
各
leading
个
members of individual
妇女组
organizations.
织也好和各个有关单位的
Of
一些
course,
领导
I'm
人
not
啊
saying that
或者
only
他们
because of
就
the
是
East meets
学术以
West
外
group.
比如说像
That's not what I
藤原
mean.
补位
I feel that at the time, we created a learning environment, a kind of environment for the free exchange of ideas.
今天他们已经或者是已经成为这方面的专家了，或者已经成为各个这个组织
And
的
that,
一个领袖
and
级
that
的
this
人物。
process
当然
positively
我不是
influenced the
说这
self-development
是因为我们
of
东西
each
方小
member.
组，仅仅是因为东西方小组，我不是这个意思。我是认为就是我们当时的一种创造的一种学习环境，以及这种交流的这种氛围，以及呢就是就这个过程，的确是对我们每一个人的成长都非常有利。
How many Western books on feminism did your group translate?
西方的这个女权主义的书籍。
We did not translate books.
我们不
We
是翻译的书
translated
籍，是翻
articles.
译的文章。
Most were not
都是一些
strongly theoretical,
就是
but
不
all
是
were truly
不是理
feminist.
论性非常强。
We translated numerous pieces. They were all published in Chinese women's journals, all kinds of women's journals.
然后都登在中国的那个妇女杂志上面，各种各样的妇女杂志上面。
What role did you play in this group?
我一直是这
I
个
was
小组的
always the one who
召集
got everyone
人。
together.
我就是说
In the beginning, it was
一开始
Lisa and I
是
who planned
和
this
Lisa 我
group.
们2个人策划的这个
Because
小
we were in
组。
existence for 7 or 8
因为有
years,
7-8年的
the
过
group's
程嘛，
members came
所
and
以
went.
这个小组的人来来走走，来来走走。
I'm the
但是
only
我
person who
是
participated
唯
from
一
the
的
very
一个
beginning
是
until the
从
end.
头到尾参加的，而且在
Moreover, during these
这
7
个
or 8
7-8年
years,
当
I
中
was
至
the
少有
organizer of the
7
group for
年
at least
或者
6 or
6
7
年，
years.
我是一个召集人。
As the organizer,
那么
I
我的
planned
这个召集
discussion
呢，也包
topics
括
for
这个
when we
策
met
划，
and
我们
chose
每
what
次
kind of
谈的
articles to
话题
translate.
是什么，我们选哪个方面的文章来翻译。
Actually,
其实
the
我们的这个翻
translations
译吧，
were
不
not
仅
only
是
from
有
English to Chinese.
英文翻成
We
中文，
also had
我
some
们也有一
translated
些
from
是中文
Chinese to
翻英文的。
English.
后来呢，
Later,
这
the
个
East
东
Meets
方小
West
组
group
也
also
为
provided
其他的
translation
一些大
service to
项
other
提
department
供这个翻
projects.
译的服务。
For
比如说
example,
我
we
们帮
helped
那
Cheng
个就是
Mingxia
宁
and
夏
her group in
他们
Qianxi
在迁西
with
搞
a
了一
project
个
related
妇
to
女
the law
法
to
教
protect
育
women's
的一
and
个
children's rights and
项目，
interests.
给农村的妇女
They
普
sought
及
to
妇女法
educate
教育。
women in the
他们就编
countryside
了
about this law.
一
They then
个
compiled a
7本的
7-part
就是妇
pamphlet
女法
promoting
宣传
knowledge
的小
about the
册子
law.
每一个册
Each
子
part used cartoons and very
都是
simple
用
words
漫
to
画
explain
和
the
很
law
简单
and,
的
for
文字
example, rights mentioned in
来
this law.
阐明妇女法当中，
This series
比如
was
说
translated
妇
into
女权益保
English
障
by
法
our
当中
group.
妇女的某一个重要的权利。
They produced
那
the
么这样的一
Chinese
个系
version,
列，
and we
像他这样的
translated
一个
it
小
into
册子，我们
English.
也是我们的小组
Then,
把它
after the
都翻
World
成了
Women's Conference, the Ford
英文。
Foundation had another
他们
project.
出的是中文，我们翻成了英文。然后呢，那个世妇会之后，
They produced a book called Responses and Reflections of Women. More than 100 women who had participated in making arrangements for the non-governmental activities were asked to write how participating in preparatory works for the conference and participating in the conference itself influenced their lives. This book was also one of our translations from Chinese to English. At that time, there was another small group called the Sino-Canadian Young Women's Group. Our two groups worked together to translate this book into English. So we translated books, articles, and some small volumes, among other things. Our earliest translations concerned, for example, domestic violence. This was a very new concept for Chinese women. I'm trying to recall. The topics covered domestic violence and, for example, women's sexual rights, images of women, mass media and women, women in the environment, etc. These were the kinds of topics that we addressed.
You brought up domestic violence. In your various activities, what projects related to this topic have you done?
Right. That was 1993. No, that's not right. In 1998, Chen Mingxia, Chen Yiyun, and I had an opportunity to go to India to participate in a symposium on domestic violence. After we came back from this symposium, we thought about it and wondered what domestic violence meant for Chinese women. Also, what was the current situation like for Chinese women? Actually, we did not understand this issue very well at the time. We only felt that it seemed this phenomenon existed. So what kind of societal, psychological, and political cultural influence did this have on Chinese women? We then discovered that there were very few resources, very few research materials, and very little data on this subject. This was the first thought. Second, we wanted to know how many kinds of mechanisms were available in China for responding to issues of violence, domestic violence, and how many of them were aimed at helping women and sought to reduce domestic violence. We were not very clear about this. We also did not know if these kinds of institutions existed. So I felt that maybe China should also have a domestic violence project. Together, we established a plan of action. The process of making this plan was rather long. It was not like the three of us returned from the conference with a clear understanding of violence and then sat down to think what we should do and acted. It was not such a simple process. Actually, what we did was to bring together people from about 20 or 30 women's groups in China, in Beijing, and brainstorm. We asked them to talk first. We asked them to talk about, first, how they viewed violence, and second, if we were to act against domestic violence, what exactly we should do. On a big blackboard, we listed what everyone said, one after another. Then we put them in a certain order. On the list, we had about 7 or 8 items that we thought were the most urgent. For example, I still remember some pointed out that we had to be able to describe the situation of domestic violence in China, so we needed data and research. So I said, okay, let's do research and data collection. Some said that we needed to raise people's awareness of domestic violence because this was still a topic that was not discussed. People did not recognize it as a problem and treated it as if it did not exist. But it did. So we should raise public awareness about domestic violence and therefore should work with the mass media.
那么我们觉得应该提高公众对暴力的认识，那么就说要跟媒体合作。
So we decided that our next urgent job was to mobilize the mass media and disseminate information about domestic violence.
那么又列出一个活动。
Thus, we identified another activity. Some said that we must intervene on behalf of women because we needed to make sure that when women were assaulted, they could go to seek help. We discussed how the existing institutions, such as residence committees and local police stations, might feel about violence, and if they had mechanisms in place to combat domestic violence or stop domestic violence. We did not know, so we needed to first go and try to understand their working procedures. Second, we needed to see if it was possible to develop these necessary resources within the existing systems. Third, we needed to train them so that they could realize that domestic violence was not simply a marital dispute. They must understand that as a police or residence committee member, they should take on the responsibility to prevent violence. Therefore, we agreed that we wanted to mobilize police, raise their sensitivity, and give them training. We also needed to mobilize judges and lawyers who dealt with these kinds of cases. Just like this, we made a list for action.
所以就这样一项一项的列，
就是在家庭当中性别的这种感觉，低等的压抑没有。
但是我跟你讲，他在课堂上应该有。老师是重男轻女。
她很漂亮，她长得可能很漂亮，她家里很富有。
对了。
哎，她有没有感到？
对呀，那有很多长得不漂亮的呀，毕竟长得不漂亮的是大多数啊。
所以，就是她就觉得。 女权主义者都是不漂亮的人，都是，就像美国也一样，女权主义者都是不刮毛的人，对吧？他有，这种
其实我觉得女权主义者就是女权主义对一个人的其实它真正的价值在于一个人的解放。
Women experience oppression, right? If a woman has high aspirations, her opportunities for a career, for education, and for participating in politics would all be unequal to a man's. So a woman could be very pretty, but she could still in various ways be violated by or oppressed by men. Unless she does not have this kind of consciousness, then that is another matter. Also, let me tell you to what level Western feminists have already analyzed the relations between men and women. They have argued that the leering by men is a kind of exploitation and violation. If a woman is pretty, she is probably violated even more. Of course, men's indifference and rejection is also a kind of violation. So is that kind of staring by men, right? Right. She's the object of more leering.
The way of looking.
The very act of gazing indicates an unequal relationship. A man enjoys his role as a subject who views you, the object. I think pretty women are violated the most. Pretty women are also subjected to the most sexual violations and improprieties. When we get on the bus, perhaps men feel that they don't want to touch us, right? But how many men are there that might, towards a pretty girl, they will disrespectfully touch her, seemingly touching her unintentionally or rub against her a little. The probability of a pretty woman being subjected to this is higher. How can she not feel that she has been violated? Is she an individual with dignity? Who has the right, without her consent or approval, to freely touch her? So pretty women experience different kinds of oppression because of their beauty. Rich women experience different kinds of oppression because of their wealth. Powerful women experience different kinds of oppression because of their status. Here, Uli is the best example. If Uli were a man, she could be in a loving relationship. Why? Because she is a woman. Doesn't she have the chance to love? Actually, the probability of power, wealth, and women's happiness have an inverse relationship, but for men are directly proportional. Isn't this unequal for women? Very good. So I feel gender oppression is a general phenomenon. It definitely is not specific to a certain kind of woman. This is what has formed the foundation of feminist theory and feminist movements. If this was only an individual woman's experience, or even a certain stratum of women's experiences, I feel that feminism would not have become an international tide. But for more than 200 years, feminism has been an international movement that has been able to transcend the times, transcend national boundaries, transcend cultures, and transcend nationalities.
性
It
别
is
压迫
because
是
women
有共
experience
性的，
sexual oppression
它绝不是个
and
性，
and repression that transcends
这
cultures,
才有
transcends
了女权主
classes,
义理
transcends
论
races,
和
and
女权主义
transcends
运动
nationalities
的
and
基础。
ethnicities.
如果
This
只是
kind
个
of
别妇女的
oppression
经
is
验，
shared is
甚
women's
至
shared
是某个
experience.
阶层妇女的经验，
This is
我觉
also
得
a
女权
fundamental
主义
reason for the women's
不能
movement
形成一个国
and
际
why
风
it has
潮。
become an international trend.
但是女权
So
主
I
义
feel in the women's
200
movement,
年
we
来，
need to call
它
for
成为
unity
一
and
个
emphasize pooling
跨
our
时代、
efforts.
跨
Of
国
course,
界、
women have multiple
跨文化、
identities,
跨
and the
民族的
multiplicity
这
of
样
our
一个国际
identities
运
leads
动，
us to different points of view and different
是因
positions in
为
some movements.
妇
But I
女
believe as a sex, we
跨
women
文
have a
化、
common interest.
跨阶级、
This
跨
is the
种
gender
族、
interest.
跨文化跨国家的
I think it is the
跨
gender
民族
interest
的
that forms the foundation for the women's
都受
movement
到
in the
了
whole world,
性别的压
and that
力和
becomes the
性别
reason
的
why we should be
压迫。
unified to defy our current gender order and gender
这种
structure.
压迫是妇女的共同经验，这也是妇女运动是一个国际性潮流的一个根本原因。所以我觉得在妇女运动当中，我们要强调的是团结，是强调的是形成合力。当然，就是说妇女身份是多重性的，那么我们的多重身份会使我们在有些运动当中持不同的观点、不同的立场，但是我相信呢，就是作为一个性别，我们是有一个共同利益的，这就是性别利益。基于这种性别利益，我觉得就是全世界的妇女有基础，也是有理由团结起来，去抗拒一个现有的性别秩序和性别结构。
那这
Did
种
this
性
kind
别
of
意识
gender
在您的工
consciousness
作当
permeate
中
your work?
有
Was
没
it
有渗
reflected
透
or
或者
expressed
是
in your work?
反映出来呢？呈现出来？
Of course.
当然，
I
我觉
feel
得
that
我
when I
自
look
己
back at my
回顾我自己
career
的职业经历
experiences
啊，
during
我
my
觉得
5
我
years
在
at
福
the
斯基
Ford
金会那5
Foundation,
年，
I basically was in a learning
我基本上属于学习
period, studying and
学习和积
accumulating
累
knowledge
了
and
解，
understanding.
再加上东西方小组的这个业余的
In
那个
addition,
学习，
I was also
实际上
studying
它
at
是
the
和我
East
的工
Meets
作
West
是
group in my
相
spare
成的。
time.
那么我离开
Actually,
福
this
斯基金
studying
会
and
以
my
后，就
work
去了联合国
supplemented
开
and
发署。
complemented each
那么
other.
联合国开发署
After
当
I
时
left the Ford
实际上
Foundation,
就是
I
对
went to
我
the
创造了
United
一个
Nations Development
一个职
Office.
位，
At that time,
是和妇女
UN Development
运动
Office.
也是相关的。
Actually, this position was created
我
for
到
me.
了联合国开发署，
It was also
我
related
就
to
有2
women's
个
movements.
职能，一个
At
职
the
能
UN
呢就
Development
是
Office, I had 2
协助联
functions.
合国机
The
构。
first was to help the United
筹备
Nations make preparations for the
妇女大
Women's
会。
Conference.
我是
In
1994
1994,
年的
I think in June 1994, I entered the UN Development
进的
Office.
联合国开发署。
At that time,
那
we
会
still
儿
had
呢可能
about
离那
15
个
months until the Women's
妇
Conference.
女大会还有15个月的时间。
The UN
那么
also
联合
needed to
国
help the Chinese
机构
government
呢
and Chinese
它
women
也要
NGOs
协
prepare
助
for
中国政
organizing the
府协
Women's
助中国的非政府
Conference.
组织妇女
So they needed to establish a
那个
position,
来准备这个
to
妇
add
女
a
大会。
position.
所以呢，他们需要建这么一个位置，就是增加一个职位。
Also,
另外
at
呢，
that
就是
time,
当
the
时
UN
的那
mandated
个
that
联合
in
国
all
机
of
构
its
还有
institutions,
这么一个
there should be a coordinator of gender
也
issues.
是一个机制吧，一个机制的保障。
We
就
called
是
it a gender
所
focal
有的这
point.
个机构里面要有一个性别问题联络
Therefore, at the
人。
UN Development
叫
Office,
gender
I
focal
also had the
point
function
啊
of being the
那么
gender coordinator.
我去了以后呢，我也被就是赋予了性别问题联络人
That
的
is to
这
say,
样一
in
个职能。
fact, at the time when I entered the United Nations, I had
实际
two
上就是说
functions.
我当时
The
进联
first
合
was
国
to
就
help
2
the
个职
Chinese
能，
government
一个
and
就是
Chinese
协助
organizations
那个
make
中国政府
arrangements
和
for the
中国的
Women's
组织
Conference. The second was in the UN Development Office to ensure the spirit of gender equality in our
第
projects
二
in
个就
China.
是在我
My
们
mission was to
联
serve
合
as the
国
gender
开发
focal
署
point.
的援助中国的
As
项
soon
目
as I
当中
started, these
确
were my
保
two
性别公
responsibilities.
平这样一个精神。那么这个就是 gender focal point 这个人要完成的使命。
I was
所以我一
able
进
to
去
get
就
this
是这两个
position
职
in
位
large part
那么
because of
我
my
为什么
5
能
years
获
of
得这个
experience with the Ford Foundation
位置
and my learning
和
about
我
gender
就是在福斯基金
consciousness
会
in
里
the
面
East
的积
Meets
累
West
和
group.
学习，和我在东西方小组练就的那种性别意识，
Later, why did I
就
call
非常
myself
的
the gender police?
关系非常密切。
Because at the time in the
然后我
organization,
为什
I
么
was
就是叫我自己
responsible
是
for
性别警
guaranteeing
察呢？
gender
就是因
equality
为我
in
当
our
时在我们
funded
那个机构
projects
里
in
面，
China.
就是 负责确保我们对中国的那个援助
What method did I use to carry out my task?
的这种
At that time, in the UN,
这种观念
there was a committee that
和这种
reviewed
保障
project
在这
proposals.
里面。那么我呢，用什么方式来保证我这个就是来完成我这个职能呢？
Before we gave any funding to projects that involved the Chinese government, the UN Development Office representative, the government representative, and the work unit that was to receive the support would all meet to make assessments.
就每给中国政府一个援助项目之前，联合国开发署的代表和中国政府的代表和受援单位三方要开一个评估会。
We would assess the project, its economic benefits, social benefits,
它的
etc.
经济效益啊，社会效益
I
啊。
turned these meetings into an opportunity to
那么
exert my
我呢，
influence.
把这样的一个会就变成了一个我施加影响的一个机会。
So I went to every
所以这种
meeting and
会
would look
我
at
每
the
次
project
必到。
proposal
那
extremely
么我
carefully.
会很仔细的看
I
这个项目
wanted to
文
look
本。
at it and to analyze who would be the
那么我要再
beneficiaries of the
看，就
project.
是而且我要分析，就
Were
是
the
这样的一
beneficiaries
个项目
men or women?
谁是受益者？
In
那
the
个
course
在
of
受
the
益者当
project,
中，
was there a
男
mechanism
女
to
是男
guarantee
人受
women
益
and
还
men
是
would
女人受
equally
益？
benefit?
那么有没有在整
Later,
个这个
I
过程当
discovered
中
that if we did not
有
have the
一
kind of
种机
person
制的
like
保
me to
证，能
intervene,
够保证妇
most of our
女和
projects would
男性
naturally benefit
平等
men.
受益。后来我就发现，我们的项目大部分项目在如果没有这样一个我的介入的话，我们大部分项目的受益人自然而然都是男性。
Since our
因为
partners
我们
often
的
were
那
government
个
officials and
合作
government departments,
对象吧，往
many
往
of
是
our
政府
project
单元。
activities were to
政
send
府
people to
的
go
部
abroad
门
to observe
这些
and
部
study
门，
or to
而且我
attend
们的那个
research
项目活动呢，
conferences.
有很多是到国外去考察、研讨会，
There were also
然后到
projects
国外
that sent people
去
abroad for short-term advanced studies, earning
就是
degrees or
一
studying
些
certain
短期的
theories or
进修
skills,
啊，
etc.
甚至还有一些去读学位啊，去学某些理论啊、技术啊什么的。然后你
Think
想
about it.
这种
The
机
structure of
会
the government
本身
itself
那个
was
政
such
府的
that
那个机
above
构
a certain level, there was a
他们就是
disproportionate number of men.
到了一定级别以后，男女就
If you
比
did
例
not
就
have a
失
fixed
调了嘛。
quota to
那么
guarantee women's
如果你在这
participation,
里面没有一个
in the end, the
硬性的指标保
beneficiaries
证的
would
话，
all be men.
那么到最后就受益者无非就是男女。
At that time, I
那么
felt
我
that
当
if
时我就
development
觉得，就是说
institutions like the UN
联合
neglected
国像这
gender
样的发展
equality,
机构，
its
他
aid
们
could
就是如
inadvertently
果我们
increase
忽
the
视
difference
了
between the two
就是性
sexes.
别的这种公平的话，
It would
他
not
们可
only
能在
promote
性，就是因为这种援助，
It not only
反而
would
加大了
not
中国
promote
的两性
social
差异。
development in China,
它并
it could
它不
also
仅没
cause
有促进
Chinese
中国的社
society
会
to
发展，
become
它还
relatively
使
backward.
中国的社会就是发展相对的落后了。
Since women are already
因为你的
disadvantaged,
这个援助你
the
不能
aid
保
must
证
try to guarantee equality
男
or
女
even
都能
benefit
够
women more.
公平的受益，甚至是女的应该受益更多的情况下，
If you give more
因为本身
resources
女
to the
性就处
dominant
在一
sex,
个
you will in fact
弱
have
势的地
increased the
位。
disparity.
那么如果你的资源更多的给了这个强势的性别的话，
Moreover, the
那实际
UN's
上你的
principle
最后的
of equality
客观上你是
includes
加大了
class
这种
and
差距。
status equality.
而
and
联合
gender
国的宗
equality
旨是公平，这个和平等，这种公平包括了就是阶级等级的公平，包括性别的公平。
So at the UN
所以我
meetings,
就在
I
联
would
合国的那个这个会
continually
上，我
stress
就不
this
断
view.
的强调一个概念。
If they did not
就是
pay
如果
careful
我们不注
attention
重
to
性别
gender
公平的话，
equality, in
联
China,
合
the
国在中国
UN's
的援
aid
助
would increase
是
the inequality
加大
of
了中国
Chinese
的社会差
society
异
and gender disparities,
和性别差异，
instead of
而
remedying
不是
the
在
disparity or
弥补
promoting
这
the
个差异，
country's
促进这
development
个国
with
家
equity
公
and
平
equality.
平等的发展。
So every time I
所
would
以呢，
calculate
我
the
就每
numbers
一次
and
就
calculate the distribution
算
of
这
the
些数
funds,
字，算这些资金的
then I
分
would
配，
firmly
然后
require them to
我就
consider
坚
my
决地要求他
recommendation,
们。
stipulating
当
in
然，
the
我这个
proposal
做
that
法也
women should
比较机
constitute
械
30
哈，
to
就是说，
40% of
那
the
你写上，
beneficiaries.
你这一次的受益人，比如说是100个的话，你写上妇女不得少于40%，
Of course, this method
或
was
者
a
妇
bit
女不
rigid.
得少于30%，就根据这个
Perhaps
项
in
目
your
的受
project
援单位
proposal, you could
他们
write
那
that there
个
should be, for example,
结
in the
就
work
是
unit that receives
这个
support,
组成结构。
ideally,
来
women
做一个
benefit
当
no
然
less
一个
than
只能是一个
50%.
现实的，当然最激进的是妇女不得少于50%，
But we have
但是
to
这
be
个在中国
practical.
来讲是太理想的一个状态，实现不了，因为她女的就没有
50% sounds
50%。
too idealistic
她
because
在
work
选
units are
拔，
often
因
not
为都
half
是一些专
women.
业性的培训嘛，或者
No
专业
matter
性
how
的
hard
一
you
些
try to
机
select
会。
women, in the cases of specialized trainings and opportunities for specialists, women do not comprise 50% of the base for selection. Thus, setting 50% as a requirement is not realistic. So I would say that there should not be less than 30% women. Perhaps there are only 20% women at this level of the work unit, so it is their responsibility to go and resolve this problem. If you are not able to solve the problem, it means that you do not have the qualifications to receive this support. This is one method of working for gender equality. There is also another method. A United Nations project usually has a set procedure of establishing a new project. This procedure is to invite some international experts to review and evaluate a project and collaborate with the Chinese applicant on the proposal for a project. In this kind of expert group, I would fight for adding a gender specialist. I was the only one who would very consciously bring up this kind of request. Moreover, I would try every possible method so that they would accept a gender specialist as a part of this assessment group, because she could bring in a gender perspective. As you are analyzing social problems, you need to have a gender perspective to look at them. Only then would your suggestions for policy change have a gender perspective, and only then could you advance the goals of gender equality. This was very difficult. I am not saying that I was successful every time, but at the very least, I was able to have my voice heard. So later, I thought, haven't I become a police officer? I wanted to examine each and every project proposal and look at each and every one. Later, this was to what degree? Let's just say that as soon as I began to speak, I would then say women. They knew this woman would talk about women's affairs again, but I did not care. Since you entrusted me with this mission and since the UN structure established this position, I wanted to fully develop its potential.
So did you feel the enforcement of this method was very effective? The outcomes?
The results were not great because the current situation was not satisfactory. I feel the results were not very good. In some cases, you felt that they would not be able to implement the necessary conditions. For example, you wanted to have 30% women for a research and discussion group or a conference. But when they did not have that amount to choose from, what could you do? Meanwhile, to train a woman candidate, it takes perhaps 10 or 20 years before she becomes qualified as a decision maker or a specialist in a certain field. So sometimes you simply could not make it, no matter how hard you tried. I felt that sometimes we had to comfort ourselves with our small successes. Why did I stress the numbers? It was for future evaluation. It meant that the goal was written in the proposal, but perhaps not accomplished. In the end, they would base their assessment on these things. So I feel that setting a number could not guarantee its realization, but the goal did exist and had a certain degree of impact on the final evaluation of the accomplishments of the project. At the very least, the evaluation can say that this aspect of this project was not satisfactory. If you have this statement, you can let people know that this is a problem. But I also believe that you cannot use these numbers to change the situation. You cannot do this. You can only achieve two goals. The first is to raise people's consciousness. If you do not make this widely known at these meetings, people will not realize that this is a problem. Think about it. 90% of those sitting at the podium of a meeting hall are men, but people usually think this is very normal. When an observation group goes abroad to study an advanced technology or policy, 95% are men, but ordinary people do not feel that this is a problem. Only by raising these issues will people realize that, in fact, this is a problem. This will not solve the problem. This will only make people know that there is a problem. Also, perhaps when the evaluation is taking place, it will deepen other people's... At the very least, I have a guarantee. I assess projects according to the number I set in order to remind other people that this is a problem. I can only do this much. So, gender equality, well...
The mission is mighty and the journey is long.
Yes, the mission is mighty and the journey is long. For gender equality, the mission is mighty and the journey is long.
Aside from these aspects of your work, what other spheres have you influenced with a gender perspective?
It is still interrelated with my work. One thing that I am proud of is, it was also when I was a project official at the UN. I grabbed this opportunity. There was funding available in the amount of $30,000 US. No one had noticed this funding. Our headquarters had innumerable documents sent over to the branch offices. Here we often had $200,000, and there we had $500,000. They were all used for different projects. One time, I suddenly came across, well, the UN Development Office had an extremely clear rule. We needed to consult with the Chinese government for all funding expenditures because we needed to have the Chinese government's agreement and approval. Only then could the UN give the final approval for who would receive this money and how it would be used. But only this money was to build gender equality capacities, to build gender capacities in the UN structure and even in the UN's organization, even in the UN organization's government collaborators in China. This was not a lot of money for this project, only $30,000. So no one paid much attention to this. Of course, because I'm a gender coordinator, of course I noticed this money. The UN themselves could decide on how to use this money. So I felt this was an opportunity that I must grab. Since all the other money, you had to consult with the Chinese government. The Chinese government often felt that women's projects or gender projects were really not important. They had to deal with poverty, solve the drinking water problem, deal with environmental issues, and decrease unemployment. These issues were given priority. Gender equality was never high on their list of priorities. So basically, most of our funding was used for projects that dealt with these so-called problems of greater urgency. Only this $30,000 could the UN allocate on its own. So I felt this was an opportunity. At the time, I had to decide whether such a small amount of money could be put to best use. I felt that we should hold gender trainings, promote gender analysis, and create training materials. Cultivating this kind of training ability in China was very valuable. So I immediately wrote a project proposal. I then submitted this project to our representative. Our representative was really busy attending to numerous tasks every day. So he was used to looking at the kinds of projects that have budgets of $3 million, $5 million, $1 million, $800,000, etc. He basically did not know that this money existed. Second, he really did not have the time to look at my project proposal. So one day, when he had a little time, I went and gave him my project proposal. He barely looked at it and said, "Okay, go and do this." He approved it, and signed his name. So then I started to plan. I did everything from looking for experts to finding teaching materials. I gathered every development organization materials concerning gender and development that were in English. Then I chose some women to work with me whom I felt had feminist consciousness and had equality and development awareness. We formed a small team that included Wang Zuofang. We then talked about translations and writings and decided the content of the teaching materials. Then we discussed the method of training. We worked together for about 6 or 7 months to compile a booklet. As far as I know, this was China's the first Chinese manual of gender training. Why did I place special importance on this manual? It was because I wish for example, this kind of UN development project, if you really want to achieve the goal of gender equality, you first need to raise the gender consciousness of the project's participants and managers, and make them pursue the goal consciously, rather than merely writing on the paper that the goal is to have 30% women. For if the project leader does not feel the need, he or she will not take the initiative to think about methods to achieve this 30%. So I felt if we could intervene early on in the development projects, and through training develop a gender sensitivity, it would make them realize that gender problems are about unequal social relations. Everyone would benefit from more just social relations. They could then become more active in taking action to initiate these kinds of operations. So at the time, these people were who we thought of as our targeted training group. Our second targeted training group was policymakers and officials. If they have a better gender sensitivity and gender consciousness, when they make important policies, they can take gender equality into consideration. For example, the retirement age in China is 60 for men and 55 for women. This is a blatant example of gender inequality. When they formulated this policy, the decision maker definitely was not a person with gender equality consciousness. So what I am saying is that if we can strengthen the policymakers' understanding of gender equality, in the future we can prevent more of these kinds of blatantly unequal policies. So one of our target groups was government officials. We all compiled this set of teaching materials, and in this process we also used this group of women who participated in the compilation work as our early gender training resources. Up until today, perhaps 4 or 5 years have already passed. This activity in China, now it has already become quite mature. I feel that this was another way of making use of my position at the UN, and this project was made with a very strategic vision. With these $30,000, we could have done something else, but we also could do this. If we want to achieve a lasting influence, I feel that training in gender equality and spreading gender, this analytical tool, is extremely significant. So I'm pretty proud of this. This kind of gender training work has continued. The demand for it has continually grown. Later, the training materials that the UN developed became other NGOs' training materials. For example, later when we did the violence project, in which I was an initiator, I again stressed this point of view. All participators in this project are assigned with more than 10 smaller projects. The core members and the managers of these smaller projects all must participate in gender training. Moreover, one of our theoretical foundations of our domestic violence project was also gender analysis. It became our analytical tool, our very foundational analytical tool and perspective. Everyone felt the same, so later the violence project took full use of these training resources. For example, Feng Yuan and others were extremely busy. Later, Shanxi province invited them. Northeast areas also invited them to present their materials. Anyway, I'm not too clear on how other people see these training resources, but I know that they are now in every part of the country providing gender trainings. At the very least, in working with domestic violence projects, we have a fundamental principle about taking these trainings. Anyone who has not taken gender training will not do development work and cannot start to work until they have completed the training. Also, our trainings are divided into several times. It has been a process of progressively moving forward. When they do the trainings, sometimes they mold domestic violence and gender analysis together and develop new analytical tools and methods. I feel that this also has significance and value.
You just talked about domestic violence and the establishing projects related to this phenomenon. After you listed the various aspects of domestic violence, what happened then?
Well, then, after we made the list, the participants chose which activities they wanted to focus on. I asked them, which one do you want to do the most? Which one attracts you or interests you the most? Since all of these groups were together in one place, we asked which aspects they wanted to be responsible for. Later, the Capital Women's Media Watch chose to focus on the media. Because they felt that their strength was raising media workers' domestic violence awareness and influencing mainstream media's coverage of violence, they took this on. Then, for example, another task was to provide about 100 cases of victims of domestic violence. The Maple Women's Hotline took this on. They felt that they had strengths in this area. There was also a project that carried out a domestic violence investigation. This was a basic investigation to collect preliminary data and to summarize it in order to illustrate the situation of domestic violence in China. The Chinese women's colleges said they could do this. Our method of assigning projects and coming up with ideas was very democratic and a process where everyone participated. I feel a sense of satisfaction and am rather proud of the domestic violence project. Then, if a group wanted to take on the responsibility for a project, they had to write a proposal and then prepare how to carry out their plan. In the proposal, they needed to address how much money they needed for the project. After we divided up the responsibilities, we decided to meet again on a certain day. After setting a date, every project needed to establish a contact person and to organize its members and delegate responsibilities. We settled on the time for the next month, for the next meeting, for example, a month later. At the next meeting, each group would present a 2- or 3-page preliminary plan and a proposed budget at that meeting. This time, not everyone came to meet. It was mainly the project leaders. I gathered them in my office to meet again. Then I collected all the proposals and then went to look for money. This later became the basis of our application to the donors in 4 different countries. We drew up an application for funds that summarized these projects. During this project, everyone also... During this project, everyone also... I myself felt that I was consciously sending out a message. Feminism's most basic value, its most fundamental meaning, is that it challenges the current cultural order and challenges the current organizational and management structure, representing a new way of doing things which is different from conventions. Why do we want to challenge masculinist culture? Because this culture is not fair. It is a culture based on hierarchy, a culture of exclusion, a culture of repression. It suppresses a certain sex. So feminism is useful in that it subverts the old cultural structure and establishes a new cultural framework. I feel that within our movement and within our organizational behavior, we should consciously pursue a kind of mode that is different from the traditional leadership style, managerial style, or organizational style.
排斥
What do we feel this kind of mode should
和控
be?
制。
It is participatory, equal in
所以
sharing,
我觉得家庭暴力项目有
and
两
it
个
does
意
not
义，
include rank or control.
一个意义是在于它，第一次正视家庭暴力这样的一个事实，然后为
So I feel that the
中国
domestic violence project has two significant aspects.
的理论和行
One
动
is that this project was the first to address the phenomenon of domestic violence candidly
这个价
and
值，
explore
第二个价
Chinese
值是
anti-domestic
它
violence
在
theories and
整
actions.
个的立项、形成项目以及项目执行和组织过程当中，它
The second significant
尝试一
aspect
种
was that during the
新
whole
的
process of
和
establishing,
传统的
implementing, and
男
organizing
权
the
的
project,
这个
we
模式
attempted
所
to
不同
create
的
a new, something different from the
一种新的
traditional
模式。
masculinist model.
我觉得我自己认为，我们是在培育一种新的文化。而女
I
权主义
believe
我
we are
认为最高的
actively
一种境
involved in
界
establishing a
是
new
要
kind of culture.
形成一种新
I
的文
believe
化
that ultimately, feminism must
从
create
原
a
来
new
的
culture.
和原
It
来
will
的传
break
统
with the
文化
old traditional culture
决裂
and，create a new
创
culture.
造一种新的文化。
这种
In
新
your
的文
view,
化
do
在
you
你
see
那
this
边
kind of new
是有一种
culture
标
having
准的
a
吗？
certain
还是有各
standard,
样化
or
的？
is there a kind of
呃
model to emulate?
没，我
No,
对
I
这一
myself
点
am
我
not too clear
认
about
识
this
不是很
point
深刻啊，
because I haven't
我自
adequately
己在这
studied
方面
theories about this.
的那个理
But I
论啊，
feel
这种学
that
习
the
啊
new
都有
culture
限
that。
但是
feminism
我
pursues
自己
is
认为，就是
anti-traditional
说，
and against all the
女
things
权
that
主义所追求的
dissatisfy
一种
and
新文
repress us,
化，
such as hierarchy,
就
control,
是
or
要
exclusion.
反传统的，我们所有的
I
给我
feel
们
at the
带来
very
不满
least
和压
that
抑
I
的，
can conceive a new
这样的
culture as
东西。
participatory,
比如
equal,
说等级制，
harmonious, and
比如
fair.
说排斥，比如说控制。那么，我觉得至少我理解的一个新的文化建构是应该是一种参与的，一
This
种
kind
平
of
等
new
的，
culture
一
will
种
allow
和谐
each
的，
individual to develop
一种
freely.
一种公平的，让就是每一个个体都
It does
能
not
够
aim to control, suppress,
得到
or
尽情的
restrict
发展
a
的
certain group of
这
people.
样的一种新文化。它不是以就是控制别人、压制别人、限制别人，
The
限
biggest
制
problem
某一
with
群人。
masculinist culture and
就是一个
traditional
如果一个社会
society
也是，
is,
我觉得男权文化
in order to
和传统社
stabilize
会
their
最大
rule,
的
the
问题
ruling
是，
class suppresses,
它
excludes,
因
or
为
controls some other
就是统
social
治者
groups.
啊，他为了稳固他自己的统治，他是
This is
以
an unreasonable
压
culture.
制、排
Women are
斥
victimized
或
in
者
these
是
situations.
控制其他的一些社会群体来
We
实现
suffer
的，
from such
这就是一个
suppression,
不合理的文化。
control, exploitation, and exclusion.
那么妇女就是在这个当
Why do
中
we，use this structure
恰恰
to
就是
subvert it?
被这些东西所害，而
I
且
feel
就是
this new
我们
culture,
就
in
是
my
就是
vision, a completely different
就
culture,
是受到了
will
这
be a
些
kind of new culture that will allow
压迫
everyone,
控制，
men and women, to
剥削
be able to completely develop
和
and to be completely free.
怎么说呢？排斥。
Of
那
course, in
么
our
我们为
generation,
什么要做？我们
we
要
will
反的
not
东
be
西呢？
able to completely change the world.
我觉得就
But
是
at the
我
very
觉得
least, we can
所以
start
我
from
个
such
人
small
理解的一个
projects.
一个新的文化，
From the
就是
process
一
that
个
we can
和
control.
原来既
Well,
有的这
not
种文化
control,
完全不同
but。manage.
它是能够让每一个人，男人和女人都能
Another
得到
thing
充
that
分
caused me to strongly pursue this goal
发展，
was that I have
充分
noticed a
自由
problem
的
with many
一种新
feminist
文化。
organizations.
那当然，我们不可能改天换地，在我们这一代人当中，至少我从我现在能够做的这
As they
个
pursue the
小的
ideal
项目
of
和我
equality
们能
between
够
men and women,
这个
they disregard the
控制，
pursuit of a
不
kind
是
of
控制，和
cultural
我们自己能够
construction.
掌握的这个过程当中开始嘛。
Maybe they are
我
working
觉
in
得
these
呢，
kinds of
就是另
projects
外呢，就
which
是让我
which
感觉
seek
到
to
为
assist
什么
women or support women.
我
But in
强
their
烈的想追求
managerial
这个东西
structure,
呢，
managerial
也是因
culture,
为
and
我也
leadership
注意到了，就
are
是
completely borrowed from
很多
masculinist
的女权
culture.
主义的组织，
They have not changed in the
实际上
slightest degree.
他们在追
Some are
求
even more
男女平等
repressive
的
and
社
more
会理念
exclusionary.
的时候，
This is
他
why I
们
feel
忽
our
视了
practices
一种文化
of the
建设
women's movement should be gender consciousness,
和
should be
这种
gender
追求。
conscious in all
他们可能
aspects.
做的是
It
在
is a kind of
辅助妇
thorough,
女，
profound movement.
在那个
I feel
支
actually
持妇
my
女
my
这样
contribution,
的项目，
really this
但
is
是他
not saying
自
that
己
I
的
did
那种管理
anything.
结构和管理
I
文
feel I've
化，
made
领
strategic
导文化
contributions, and this is
是
my
完
strong
全是
point.
从男权那儿借用过来的，丝毫没有改变。 有的甚至比男权
I believe that I am a
的
person
这个
with
结构
vision, so
更
in the
压抑
initial
人，
stages,
更排斥
I
人。
can add some principal ideas to a plan. I also have a personal
所以我就觉
characteristic that
得
has helped
就是
me.
说，
I have the ability of persuasion. In my interactions with other people, I can
我觉得
communicate
就
my
是我
ideas
们
with
的这
others
种
and
妇
convince
女
them
运
so
动的
these
这个实
ideas
践是
become a goal
应
for
该
other
是全
people
方
as
位
well.
的，是一
I
个
think
一
Chen
个一
Mingxiao's
个一种
really
彻
carried
底
out her
的
plans
深
according
刻
to
的一
this
种运
goal.
动。
All the concrete things are completely their doings.
那么就此呢，我们
Personally,
就
how do you see the current
看一
state
下
of
我们
development
大陆
of
现在的
feminism
女权主
in
义的发展
China?
现在是什么样一个状况？用您的眼光来看待。
I feel that it is still extremely weak, extremely fragile, and we still have very little
而
power.
且是在
Many
这
things
个
are still in
力
their
量非
very
常的弱
rudimentary
小
stage.
很多还是处在萌芽阶段。
What do you mean by fragile?
脆弱就
It
是
is
说
fragile
它
because it does
连
not
合
even
法
have
的
a
生存
legitimate
的空
space to
间都没
exist.
有啊。
Nowadays, mainstream
只不
society
过
has
就是
turned a
现
blind
在
eye to
主
us.
流社会对
We
你
have not
争
developed
议
to the
力啊
degree that they feel that they have to
你
deal
根
with
本
us as
就
a real
没有
threat.
到让
One
人
of the
家要
mainstream
正视
culture,
你，
once the
把你
mainstream
当做一个
culture
威胁
senses a
的
sort of threat,
这个
it is very easy for them
程
to
度上。
suppress us.
如果你就是说，如果一旦
That is what I think is fragile.
主流
We
你
exist
主流
in a
文化
limited space.
真的是觉得受到了某种威
We
胁，
lack funding, lack space to exist,
他
and
们要来
lack
遏
political
制你
legitimacy.
是很容易的。
Feminism is extremely,
这就是我觉
extremely
得的脆
fragile
弱
in every aspect.
大家都在夹缝
The
中
fact that we
生
can
存。
still exist proves that we are
这
very
种
weak.
脆弱有这种制度上的脆弱，资金上的脆弱，生存空间上的脆
Mainstream
弱，
cultures does not
政
even
治合
consider
法
us a
就是
threat.
合法
If
性
it
的
feels
脆弱
threatened, it could easily eliminate
都
us.
非常非常
I
脆弱，
believe that our groups actually are no rival to the mainstream
而且
culture in a
现在
confrontation.
还能生存，
So
恰
feminism
恰
here
说
is
明
fragile,
你
small,
很
and
弱
weak.
小啊。
But it is very
主流
progressive
文
and it
化
has a
都
strong
没有
vitality.
觉得你是一个威胁。如果
In the long
他
term,
要觉得你是
because,
威胁了，
after all,
他要来
feminism
清除
represents a
你
kind of
是义如反掌的。我觉得就是我
more
们这些
vigorous
组
spirit and
织
value,
实际上是没有
which is
完成主义
necessary for the development of Chinese society.
所以是脆弱。另外，它也弱小。
I think that feminism's
但是
greatest value, that women's movement's
它有很
greatest
强的
value,
先
is
进性
pursuing equality and justice.
它有很强
I
的生
feel
命
that for the
力作
healthy
用
development of a
从
society,
长
these two
远来讲
concepts are indispensable.
因为它毕竟
Actually, this returns us to the earlier question
代
about
表
Chinese
了
culture.
一种
Chinese society has 5,000 years of history.
更有
Up
活力
until
的
now, you still cannot say that it is fair,
一种
that it is a fair, equal
一
society.
种
And
精神
pursuing
和价
freedom,
值，
equality, and justice has not become our common goal.
而且是中国社会的前进所必不可少的。我个人认
It
为，
is
就
not
是
our
说女
people's
权主义
shared
的
understanding, and
最
it
大
is
的
not
价
our
值呢，
society's
就是
shared
民主最大
understanding.
价值呢，它是追求平
But
等
it。is hard for me to imagine how a society that is not
我
fair,
觉
not
得这对
democratic,
一个
not
社
open,
会
and not
的
inclusive
健
could
康发
develop.
展，这两个理念是绝不可少的。
How many people's
这个其
creativity,
实又回到了我那个
individuality,
刚
and
才就是
passion
对
have
那
not
个
have been
中国
suppressed and
中国文
depleted
化
in
的这个一
society?
个看法，就是如果就
So,
是中国社会
I think a
从
society
5000
that is
年的
not
这
equal,
个
not free,
历
and
史
not
走
just
走
is
到今
consuming
天，
its own energy.
它到今天依然不能说它是一个公平
This
平等
society's biggest
的社
enemy is
会，而
self-depletion.
且
This
追
kind of
求
system
自由、
produces this
平
kind
等
of
和公
self-depletion by
平，
repressing and wasting
没
human
有
beings,
成为我们民
wasting
族的一
human
个共识
resources.
都不是我们民族的一个共识，也不是我们社会的一个共识。但是我
So I
很
feel
难
that
想象，
feminism pursues a kind of very
一个
progressive
社会
idea that Chinese society really needs.
在不公
You
平、
cannot
不
question its
民主、
progressiveness.
不公
This
开、
gives
不
feminism
开
a life
放、
force.
不包容的一个
Perhaps
环
this
境
has
下，
not come
它
out
怎
today,
么
but
能发
feminism
展？
is suitable for the needs of social
有多少人
advancement,
的这种
especially
创造力
Chinese、society.
个性和热情
So I feel
是会被
feminism
压
in
抑掉、
China is
消
really
耗掉的。
valuable. The
所以一个
existence of
我
these
觉得
women's
一个不平
organizations
等、
in China is
不
important for
自由、
reconstructing a
不
social
公
culture,
平
a
的
societal
一个
culture.
社会发展本
But what
身
is the
就是它
present
受到了它
situation
自
that
己
these
的内
Chinese
耗
women's
的。
organizations
首
find
先最大的
themselves
敌人
in?
是他自己的内耗，就是这种制度产生的这
They're
种
in
内
their
耗，对
early
人的这种
stages.
压抑和浪
Why do I
费，
say
对
this?
人才的那种浪费。
Now, actually, the work of
所以
some
我觉得，就是
women's
女权主
organizations
义
is service
它追
oriented
求
and
的这个
supports
理念
victimized,
是非常先
marginalized,
进
and
的
weak，groups of
是中
women.
国社会 非常需要。
Many women's organizations
所以它的
still
先
have
进
not
性不容
consciously
置疑，不可
begun
置疑。
pursuing
这
equality,
个先进
justice,
性
and
给了它
democracy.
一个生命力，
So now
这
they
个
are
生命
only
力可能
service
今天没有
providers
体
and
现
not
出来，
very political.
但是它是符合这个社会进程的需要的，尤其是中国社会。所以我觉得女权主义在中国非常有价值，就这些妇女组织在中国的生存，对于我们的就是社会文化的重建来讲，都是极有价值的。但是你说中国的这些妇女运动处在一个什么样的现状呢？其实它的这个现状又是在很初步的，就是很初期的一个现状。为什么我这么说呢？那么实际上现在的这些妇女组织，她在从事的这个工作又是一个服务性的工作，是一个具体的，是一个服务性的，仅仅是作为受害被边缘化这种脆弱妇女群体的一个支撑而已。很多的妇女组织还没有自觉地把追求公平、公正、民主这样的理
But I
念
believe that feminism is
当
political.
做他的一个自觉的追求，没有。
If we do
所以
not
现
elevate
在
it to the
它只
political
是
level
一
and the
个
cultural level
服务的提供者，
to win a
所
greater
以
space
它
for
的
us to
政治性
exist,
不高。
then we are doomed to be fragile,
但是
doomed to
我
be
自己
weak
认
and
为
small,
女权主义就是政治的。
doomed to collapse at the first blow.
如果我们不能把它提高到政治层面，
Also,
不
I
能
do
提高到
not know
文
if it
化
has
层
any
面，
future because it only provides service and
来
can be replaced by other service
为就
providers.
是说我们自己赢得更大的生存空间的话，我们
If
会
you
注
do not
定
have
的
a
脆弱
strong，social
我们
idea
注
and
定的弱
political
小，
idea as support, and to give
我
you
们注定
perspective,
的
you are
不堪
only
一击，
providing a service.
而
You
且
are just
有
a
没有
service supplier.
前途不
You're
知道
not providing for other
就很
people,
难讲
so
了。
you do not have much value.
因为服务的供给
What
者，
makes you
你
different
不
is that
提
you
供，别人
target
可以提
women
供。
to serve.
如果你没有一个强烈的
So
社
I feel
会
that Chinese women's movement must have a
理
vision,
念
a、long-term
政治理
vision.
念作为你的支撑的话，和作为你的眼光的话，你
It
仅仅作
needs,
为一个
it
服务的
also
供给
needs
商，
outstanding
就是
leaders.
供应者，那么你不供给别人供给，
I
也有
believe
供
that
给，
the
但是你
Chinese
的价值
women's
并不大。
movement,
只
we
不过你服务的
activists,
对
should
象
have
是
a
女
kind
人
of
而
a
已。
cooperative consciousness and a sense of mission.
所以我觉得中国的妇女运动要有眼光，要有远见，另外还需要出色的领导人。
This
另
mission
外，我觉
actually
得
is
中
not
国妇
simply
女
to provide some services to
运
one or
动
two weak
就是
groups,
我
but
们
to
这些
ask
行动
what
者
exactly is the historical significance of our existence?
应该有一种合
What
作
exactly
的
is
意
our
识
social and cultural
和一种
significance?
使命感。
If we
这个
can reach
使
some
命
shared
真的是不仅
understanding
仅
about
就是
this
说我为
mission,
一两个脆
then it
弱
would
人
be fine
群
if we start
提
from
供
providing
一
service.
些服务，而是说我们存在的历史意义到底是什么？我们
Moreover,
的
the
社会意
reality
义
of
和文
today
化意
is
义
that
到
we
底
can
是什
only
么？
do
对这个
service.
达成一个
We
共
can use
识，
service as a
哪
means
怕
of
我们从
striving
服务
for
做
our
起，这
level
个
of
没有关系。
credibility,
而
fighting
且
for
现
our
在也只
existence.
有只能做服务，
That is to
这也
say,
是
to
现
fight for our
实。
legitimacy.
而且我们也通过做服务
I feel that
来
now many women's
争取
organizations have
我们的
actually
可
taken
信
service
度
as their goal.
争取
They
我
do
们
not feel that
的
service is only
这
a
个
means, so this
生
is
存
why I have
的
said
这
that I
个
think now that China's women's movement is still in the beginning period of
来
its
争
early
取我们的
stages.
合法性和合理性。我觉得现在很多的妇女组织呢，实际上是把服务当做目的了，他们没有觉得这仅仅是个手段。所以我觉得呢，也是就我为什么说中国的妇女运动现在还处在很早期的初级阶段，也是这个意思。
那您
As
对
you
这
look
个
ahead,
展望
do
有
you
没有
have
一些
any
设想和
ideas
规
and
划？
plans that you'd
或
like
者
to
是
设想和规划，我觉得就是我们
As
要
for
相互合
ideas
力
and plans, I would like to
我们要
continue to
相互团
join
结
forces with
我们
others
要
who
达
share
成
our
共识
vision.
这一点
We
我们
want
都
to
没有做
strengthen
到
our
我
unity.
们现在这些妇女组织
We
都
want
不
to
团
reach
结
a，shared
而且
understanding.
互相在竞争，互相不
We
服
have
气，
not been able to succeed in this
甚至还
basic
互相拆
point.
台。我们没有共识，
Our current
正
women's
因为我们没有共识，
organizations
我
are
们才会
not
互相竞
united.
争。而且我们不是一个，就是
Moreover, they
互相
often compete with
就
each
是
other and
协
criticize
作
each other,
互相
even
分
to the
工，
extent that they
发挥我们各
sometimes
自
cut the
的
ground out from each other's feet.
比较优势。
Our
另外，
current we do not have a shared
的这样的
understanding.
一个
Because we do not have a
格局，
shared
不是。
understanding, we compete with each other.
就是因为我们之间没有共识嘛，我们也不讨论这些事情嘛。
Also, we are not
所以我觉
coordinated
得
and
就
do not work together
需要一个
to divide up what needs to be
领
done.
袖人物的出现，
We are not in a system that
把
allows
大家
each of
真的
us to
是
exert our respective
拧
strengths.
成一股绳，然后
Because we do not have a shared understanding among us,
形
we do
成我
not
们
discuss
统
these
一的一
things.
个战略。不是说这个领袖是一个个人，他可以是
So
个
I
群
feel we
体，
need a leader to emerge. When
但是要
everyone
有
truly makes
抱
joint
负，
efforts, we
要
will have a
有
unified
这个政治
strategy.
眼光，
I am not
有
saying
政
that
治
this
谋
leader
略
has to
这
be
一
an
群妇
individual.
女
It could also be a collective of women that must have ambition,
能够
political
把大家的力
vision,
量
and political strategy.
团结在一起，形成一个合力，而且还不断的发
They must
展
be
壮
able
大
to
我们
rally
自己
and
的
unite
这
our
个
power and
力
create a
量。
unified force, and also continually
而
develop
且我
and
们手
strengthen our
段是
power.
什么？我们要不断的
What
去
means
思
will we
考
use? We
和
should
反
keep
思。
thinking and reflecting on this
我觉得
question.
这种时候，
This
我又想
reminds
到
me
了
of the
福特
Ford
基金会的
Foundation
想法
project,
就
or
是
my
为什么
relationship
就
with
有我
women's
们妇女
studies.
学的这个关
The
系。
Ford
就
Foundation
福特
once
基金会就
invited a
让我
Canadian
让我
scholar
和
and
加
me
拿
to
大
do
的
an
一个学者
evaluation
做一个
together.
评估嘛。那中国的妇女
In
运
order for
动
the
怎
Chinese
么
women's movement to
能够
continue
深
to
入下
deepen
去，
and strengthen,
能够发
I
展壮
felt
大？
that it would be strategically important to
我
build
就觉
women's
得
studies in higher
在高校
education,
建妇女
since
学
this is a way of influencing
很
a
有
whole
战略
generation of
意义，
women.
因为
with a
它可以
totally
影
new
响到
set
下
of
一代
values.
年轻的妇女，她用一种完全不同的一种
Of
价值
course, I
观
had
念。
already
这
thought
个当然我
about
也想考
my
虑，
own
想到
miserable
我自己大学
experiences
的
in
那个痛苦
college.
经历。那如
If
果
I
我
had
在
been
大
able
学
to
的时候，我
study
就能
such
在课
theories
堂
in
上
college,
学到这
I
些
would
课
have
程，
suffered
我
less
不就
and would
少
have
受
spent
几年
fewer
罪
years
吗？
in darkness.
是吧？少在那个
I feel that
黑暗中
feminism is like
挣扎几
like
年
a
嘛。
heavenly vision.
我觉得真的李前主义像一个
It
天
allowed
眼
me
一
to
样的，
have a
让我
new
打开了一
vision.
个天眼，
It allowed
让
me
我
to
重新认识
recognize
自己，
myself
让我重
anew.
新给自己一个定位，
It
它
allowed
给
me
了
to
我
give
一个
myself
自
a
信
fresh
心。所以
orientation.
我就觉得我们应该把这样一个机会给年轻的妇女。
Feminism gave me
另外，我们
self-confidence.
有就是说去
So I feel that we should give this opportunity to young women.
应该培养
We
一
also
批
should
未来的同道
go to
人。
women college students to train a large number of future colleagues and future activists.
因为我们资金有限，
Because of
我
our
们
limited
的
funding and
能力有
ability, we
限，
must decide with which group
哪
of
一个是
people
我
we
们
have the
最
most
具有
potential
战
for
略
making the greatest change.
意义的这种就是实施
I think that we
干
should
预
target
的
those in
这
higher
个
education.
人群，
There is the slogan, fighting for the next generation.
我们要争夺下一
We
代
should
嘛，
fight for the next
争夺
generation
为
of women
下一代的
against
妇女嘛
patriarchy.
和男权来争夺嘛。
So in the assessment
所以
report
我
that I
当时
gave to
在
the
给
Ford
福特基金会
Foundation,
做
we
的这
strongly
个
appealed to the
评估
Ford
报告里
Foundation
面，
to fund the establishment of
我们
women's
就
studies in China.
强烈的呼吁福特基金会应该资
At
助
that time, there were
中国
very
妇
few
女学
schools
的
that offered good women's studies
因为
courses.
中国当时能够开出像样的妇
There were
女学
few
的课的
institutes
学
and
校都不
departments
多，
that could
院
do
系都
this.
不多。
I felt that this
我觉得这个
project
是
would have a
非
great
常
social
具有
significance and significance for the
社会意
future,
义和
and that the
未
Ford
来意义
Foundation
的
should give serious
一个
consideration
项
to
目
funding
福特基
this.
金会应该考虑。
Later, fortunately,
后来
Ford Foundation
很荣幸
accepted
的
our
是福特基金会
suggestions,
采纳了
and that was how
我们
Du
的这个
Fangqin's project got the
所以才有
support
了
to
杜芳琴
develop
的
a
这个
women's studies curriculum in
项目
China.
中国妇女
Prior
学
to this
是
point, the Ford Foundation had not
以前
provided
福
funding
特
for
基金会是
developing
不
new
资助学
academic
科建
fields.
设的，它可
They
以
funded
资助
some
一些政
policy
策性研
research,
究，
but not
但是它
establishing
不
new
资助学科建
disciplines.
设，而且学科建设
Also, a
是
rather large
需
amount
要
of
资
money
金
is
量比较大。
required to establish a new academic field. The
所以我
Canadian
们就
specialist and I both
就
felt
说
that in
但是
order
我
for the
和
feminist
那个
movement
加
to
拿大的
develop,
专家，我们
we
俩
must
都
have a
觉得
reserve of
就
talented
是
people
我
for
们
the
女
future.
权运动要发展，我们是必须要有
Of course,
未来
first
的
of
后
all,
备
the
人
most
才储
important
备。
thing is that this is a
当
theory
然，
and a
首
tool to
先最重要
liberate,
的是解放，
to
现
liberate
就
women.
是解放妇
I
女。
truly hope that thousands
它是解
upon
放妇女
thousands
的
of
一个
women can benefit from the same process that I
真
benefited
的我
from.
就希望我自己的
Only
这
by
种
first having
受
this
益
kind
的
of consciousness can
这样
one
一个
make
过程
a
能够
choice in
在
life.
千千万万的妇
So
女
we
身
feel
上
that perhaps we
发
will
生。
still have our reserve army.
另外一个
Despite
就
the
是
fact that
你只
today
有
we are still
在
small and weak.
有了这样的觉悟
So
的
this was another project
前提
that I
下
worked
他
on
才有可
behind
能
the
做人
scenes.
生选择嘛。那么我觉得潜在当中可能还会有我们的后备军呢，尽管我们今天很弱小。所以这也是我在幕后又操纵的一笔。因为我觉得
I feel that today's young women face as much confusion as those of our generation. They are influenced by the commercial culture. The degree of commoditization of women today is much more severe than we had experienced 20 years ago.
被商业化的程度远远要高于我们20年前。
If we do not use feminist theory to fight against the commercial culture, then the fate of women will be very tragic. If you tell a woman that she is pretty, she feels that she has capital. But actually a process of expropriation occurs when her capital is realized. It is a process of her subjectivity being stripped away. She becomes completely objectified. How can we raise the consciousness of pretty girls and girls that are not so attractive? This kind of self-awareness and subjective consciousness. Through this process, women can take control of their life, take control of their fate, and not be manipulated by anyone, including commercial culture and those who hold political power. This is a very difficult task. We as women who want to reach the higher plateau must reach this level of consciousness. I hope that all women will be able to reach this realm and that all Chinese will be able to reach this realm. Feminist theory provides a useful tool to encourage these young women to pursue this goal. It provides an opportunity and a useful tool.
How will this kind of new culture, in contrast to traditional culture, come to be embodied in your personal life?
I feel that I'm really very fortunate. In my own life, I've been very lucky. After I left my grandparents, I feel that my home life became rather happy because my mother was a person with vision. She was a professional woman, and in my household, the yin was always stronger than the yang. I feel that my mother had more vision than my father, and had more decision-making power, more ideas, and more strength. I will give you an example. I was to decide which colleges that I wanted to apply before taking the college entrance exam. My father did not have an opinion, and my mother told me to act in accordance with my own wishes and not to think about them or the family. Many parents would have encouraged their children to stay by their sides. In addition, my brother was already in Shanghai, so they only had me close to them. My mother told me that I should apply to universities based on my own preferences and not to think about what they would want. My father was unable to say this. The night that I filled in the form with my college choices, the two of them stayed in their room so I could decide by myself. They did not participate in my decision. It was my mother's idea that they should not try to influence my decision and that I should try to decide for myself. Later, I made a list of top-tier universities, none of which were in Nanjing. I only applied to these schools. At that time, for parents to not interfere and to allow their daughter complete freedom to choose a school that was far away was almost unheard of. But my parents gave me this freedom. I still remember how they saw me off. When we got to the train station, tears rolled down my father's face. My mother, though, had a triumphant smile. I was off to pursue my own new life filled with boundless opportunities. My mother's face looked pleased, and she had a kind of victorious smile, and my father was quiet as tears fell from his eyes. Of course, my father is a rather sentimental, a rather sensitive man, so I grew up in this kind of environment. To tell the truth, generally there were not traditional gender norms in my home. I mean my parents' home. It was very different at my grandparents', but it seemed as if I had a rebellious spirit. I never took these norms to heart, even if they forced me to do them. For example, after I finished sewing, I would forget how to do it again. I would not allow it to become an unconscious action. It was something that I had to do, even though I didn't want to. If I did not do it, they would spank me, so I had no choice but to keep a stiff upper lip and do it. But after I returned to my parents, I was no longer controlled and repressed. I led a carefree life growing up. I think that my mother definitely was a woman with a vision. She had courage and insight and was daring. That kind of strength she had was certainly not any less than any man would have. So actually when I saw this project, only then did I think about my own home life and these two occasions. I completely forgot. It has been more than 20 years, but since today you asked, that question caused me to reflect that my family was not a traditional family in a strict sense. This is probably the foundation for me to eventually accept feminism and become a feminist. Now I am very happily married. It is also because I have complete autonomy in my personal life.
So who was the one to make the first move in the relationship?
Well, in the end, a suitor emerged. After that miserable, lonely 7 or 8 years, After I endured 7 or 8 years of loneliness, this person emerged. I believe that this was fate. It would be very difficult to rationally analyze why I met this person. He is very gentle and does not have any desire to control me. I take pride in my female friends' opinions of me. They say that I am the only person who they know who did not change after getting married. After they got married, most of my female friends did not go out anymore. For at least 4 or 5 years, if you wanted to invite them out for drinks, to see movies, or to go to gatherings at other people's houses and stay overnight, you would not be able to convince your married female friends to go out with you. They can do these things when they are single or when they are not seeing anyone. But I still meet freely with my friends, and my husband, do you know what he will say to me? He tells me that if it is too far, I should not return home that evening because he worries about my safety on my way home. He never tells me that I must come back before 8 in the evening or not to go. On the contrary, he tells me that if it is too far or it becomes too late, then I should come home the next day.
Has he had some kind of gender training?
No. I believe he has his disposition. He's a very gentle man. He's not the kind of person who takes pleasure in controlling other people or interfering in other people's lives. Perhaps this was fate. Actually, when I started dating him, I had not yet become a feminist. I was still depressed. So at the time, I felt a little sad. Good men did not ask me out. He was just a very ordinary guy. Only gradually did I realize his true value, and now I feel that he is really an outstanding individual with a terrific character. He is not polluted by Chinese traditional culture. This is really a rare attribute to find in a man who grew up in China. His behavior is naturally gentle and fair, and he would never control me. So I feel very, very fortunate. This includes when I came here looking for work. I feel that every aspect of the job was quite... When I was about to graduate, I satisfied every aspect of the job description requirements. But then I saw the job was in Guangzhou. When I found this job opportunity online, he was lying in bed. At the time, the two of us were in the United States. I thought that I definitely should not consider this opportunity. Otherwise, our household would not look like a household. I certainly was not thinking like a 小女人, but I felt that the two of us should be together. When I went to the United States, my husband accompanied me. Meanwhile, I thought that it was a shame that I was going to have to pass up this opportunity. But my husband said to me, "If you like this job, you should not give it up because of me." So I said, "Okay, I would try for the job." I started to write the application, started to send my resume. I sat there while he lay on the bed. It was 11 or 12 o'clock at night when I discovered a work opportunity online. Then I came back to China. We are still very much in love. Later, many people would ask me, "Aren't you afraid he will cheat on you?" But I think a man with this kind of personality is not the kind pursued by today's young women, right? That is to say, perhaps from a traditional point of view, he is not a macho man. But I wonder what fosters that kind of gender notion that men should be macho, dominant, and self-centered. And women are just their dependents? So I feel that this was also fate, finding such a man. Actually, when I was dating him, there was also another guy who was a PhD student. At that time, I lived at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences by myself in a dormitory room. The PhD guy often stopped by to talk to me, even though in the end, he never clearly told me how he felt. But I know that he had feelings for me. Every evening, as soon as I got off work, he would come over to my dorm room to talk to me. At that time, I was working at the Ford Foundation and living in a single room in the graduate student housing at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. People who lived there usually ate in the dining hall at night. But by the time I would get home from work, the food in the dining hall was sold out. So when the PhD guy came over to talk, I would often be making myself instant noodles. He would already have eaten and then would come over my room to talk. So as I made my instant noodles, often adding 2 sausages, I would talk to him. He often said, "Your salary at the Ford Foundation is pretty high. You should go to a restaurant to eat. Why are you eating instant noodles?" My current husband would also sometimes come over to see me. He saw that I often ate instant noodles or only reheated leftover food. Although it was against the rules, I had a small electric burner that I hid in my room to use sometimes. He saw this and said, "Let me make dinner for you." Because my husband is ethnically Hui, he did not like to eat at the dining hall. He said, "I make food for myself, so making some for you is no problem. I know you cannot get back to eat dinner in the dining hall, so I am going to start making dinner for 2. Contrast is obvious. Perhaps the PhD guy today is already a professor or a scholar, but I feel that this really is not important for women. What is important is how your significant other loves and takes care of you. So of the 2 guys, I chose the latter. I chose the one who made dinner for me. My husband is a very reliable person. He said he would make me dinner, and he did it every day for more than a year until we were married. Then he continued to do it even after we were married. So today, even though my husband's work and his accomplishments are average, his feelings towards me and his loving care of me have never changed, not even for a day. Moreover, this kind of whole loving care meets my needs for space and my career development. He has never attempted to use his needs as a reason for me to abandon my needs. Thus, I feel this kind of man is really valuable. I was very lucky to have met such a man. Moreover, my husband is very handsome.
Have you thought about women's traditional roles, such as preparing meals, doing the housework, being gentle, kind, and considerate? Are they contradicting the subjectivity and autonomy of today's women? If so, how should this be dealt with?
I feel that there is not a contradiction. Because things like preparing food, washing clothes, and doing housework are all necessary tasks for living. But we have 2 roles. We have a role in the realm of our personal lives and a role in the public sphere. As a woman, we have a responsibility to harmonize the role of our personal and public lives, to fulfill these 2 roles. What I cannot accept is that because of the need for women's roles in the private sphere, women must abandon their roles in the public sphere. This is unfair to women. No one has the right to force us to give this up. This includes people I love and people who love me. For example, now many people use love as a reason to make women give up many things. I do not think this kind of love is healthy. It is unhealthy and limiting. Now many women are confused by these kinds of things. They feel that for the person they love, everything is worth doing. What kind of culture is this? Why does our culture have to be built on the basis of sacrifice? Why should happiness be built on someone else's sacrifice? This again returns to how men and women in their personal lives together bear this responsibility of domestic roles. What right do people have to push the roles and responsibilities of personal lives all on women so that men can completely devote themselves into the public sphere and make women sacrifice our roles in the public sphere? So in our families, we must also pay attention to equality. Really, it is this way. You should take on the responsibility to ensure an equal relationship. I believe that only when you have a fair relationship will you have a healthy relationship. Otherwise, women are repressed. When I was young, I still had the vain hope of love and a kind of illusion of romance. I felt I could be perfectly happy to sacrifice myself. But think about it. Living a lifetime as a woman, then to the outside world, you have not accomplished anything. Can a woman be perfectly happy this way? I do not think so. If a woman feels comfortable living like this, she has already been completely oppressed. Why did middle-class women in the women's movement in America have that kind of feminine mystique? They experienced a kind of nameless depression and discontent. In the 60s, Betty Friedan and her group of feminists were middle-class women. They attended college just like their husbands, but as soon as they had children, they stayed at home. Being at home, women then felt depressed. They could not clearly elucidate their feelings, but they were not happy. They had money, security, guarantees, and happiness, and perhaps their husbands really loved them. But they felt an indescribable depression, an indescribable force that stirred their hearts and minds. Until one day this thing burst free and was let out to form a new round of feminist movements in the 60s. Why did this occur? They wanted to find and return to their life space that they had lost, their public space. As a person, we are social beings. We cannot completely separate ourselves from social life without feeling anything. If this kind of need is not satisfied but is repressed, of course we will naturally want to break free. This is also a kind of oppression. Our choices are restricted. The only reason is because we are women. It is not because we do not have capabilities. It is not because we do not have skills. It is not because we do not have vision. Isn't this gender inequality? A person who has dignity and has self-awareness will without a doubt break free. She will definitely not be satisfied. Isn't this a forewarning of a new revolution? So I still want to call into question why a society would want to be built under a system that is not fair. Why do we demand a certain group of people only because of their sex or because of their class or because of their background to naturally give up certain things? Is this social justice? When some people give up too much, isn't this a waste of people's intelligence and human resources? Why does our society have to be built on this kind of irrational, unreasonable system? Why is it that some people's development is based on other people's complete lack of development? Look at some male chief executive officers, provincial governors, and county magistrates. Their advancements have been achieved at the cost of some other people's lack of progress. I want to question this mode of development.
In your current work, in the current organization, have you introduced gender analysis?
Yes, there is some, but it is mostly done in many very subtle ways. Our work on the China project has not completely unfolded. Currently, the main aspect of our work is to provide training for factory workers as well as for factory managers, mainly managers in foreign investment enterprises. Now I pay close attention to our trainers. This group should be a balanced mix of men and women. In addition, our training materials should embrace the concept of gender equality. Another important point is who participates in our trainings. I want to show the factory management to see that if men and women can both participate in this kind of training, it will be beneficiary to the factory itself. There is also another point that is to our advantage. 80% of the workers are women. Because we concentrate on the labor industry, 80% of the workers are women. So no matter how hard you try to block women's training opportunities, women still make 80% of this labor pool. Thus, in the project that provides opportunities for workers' training, women workers have quite a lot of opportunities to participate. But in the project that provides training to managers, men make up more of the group. Factories generally are structured like a pyramid. The more you move towards the bottom, the more women there are. The more you move towards the top, the more men there are. So this is a challenge for me. Now, I can only use my individual power to produce some sort of influence. For example, often when I come into contact with factory managers, high-level managers, I try to explain to them that in an industry with 80% women, it would be a very rational decision to have a reasonable proportion of female managers. Because women can perhaps better understand women's needs in work and in life. Maybe they can better communicate with female workers. Of course, I only can use this kind of reasoning to exert a subtle influence on these factory managers. I want to battle this deeply ingrained sexism, but I know that the road I must travel is very long. The principle of how I do things is that I do not deliberately create opportunities for myself. I merely wait for opportunities. That is to say that I wait for opportunities to become ripe. But when they do, I make the best use of every opportunity. That is why I think that I am not a person with wicked ambitions. In addition, I do not feel sad when I have been marginalized because I do not have any huge desires. I do not have the desire for power. I do not have the desire for money. Of course, I wish for money, but I will rely on my own hard work to get it. I would never take money from any of the projects that I work on. In that aspect, I do not have the desire for money, but I have a very strong ability to make money. For example, my salary for this job is very high. I am this kind of person. I would not deliberately pursue anything.
所以我呢，就是说，我是这样一个人，我不会去刻意的去做任何事情。
But you have been doing a lot of things.
所有这一切都不是刻意做的，都是水到渠成。
Everything is because when
比如
conditions
说我
are
在
right,
福特干嘛5年，
opportunities have emerged.
我的那个老
For
板
example, I worked at the
就
Ford
把我介绍
Foundation
到
for 5 years.
联合国开发署，在联合国开发署就
My
自然而
boss
然的去做
introduced
了
me
这
to
些
the
事
United
情，有了这
Nations
些
Development
机会。
Office. At
正
the
因为我
UN
做了这些
Development
机会，
Office, I could
这个
naturally
托尼
could
赛
accomplish
奇
these
才
things
把我
and have these
介绍到哈
opportunities.
佛去读书。
Tony Seitz recommended me for a
有了
graduate
哈佛
degree
去
at
读书，
Harvard
我
because I made good
找到
use
了这
of
个
these
工作，
opportunities.
但是没有一个是我自己刻意追求的，没有。我就不会刻意追求任何事情。
Because I graduated from
但
Harvard,
是
I
我
found
觉
this
得就
job.
是说一个
But
人
none
的
of these things happened
努
because I
力，
purposely
一个
pursued
人的
them.
诚心，
I do not purposely
会
pursue
让机
anything.
会来找你。
But I believe that a person's hard
如
work
果
and a
机会来
person's
了，
sincerity
我
and
会把这个机
earnestness
会
will
用
bring
到最好。
opportunities. If an opportunity presents itself, I do my very best. I think this is my attitude in life and my way of doing things.
I have a question I'd like to ask. As someone who knows and understands China, how do you describe the kinds of resistance or conflict that Western feminism faces in China? How do you see this? Second, as a forerunner in the promotion of Chinese feminism, what significance does this kind of work have for you? How would you evaluate yourself? How do you view yourself as a feminist?
I feel that it is normal that feminist theories, when introduced to China, encounter obstacles. Why? It is because feminism wants to change the existing structure. As you can imagine, any kind of challenge to the existing order will meet with resistance. You cannot expect people who benefit from the existing order to happily give up some of their power. This challenge is also an ideological challenge. It is different from the mainstream Chinese ideology. So, of course, mainstream ideologists do not accept feminism. This is very normal because of feminism's revolutionary nature, political progressiveness, and subversive qualities. Therefore, when they get to know feminism, they turn pale with terror and start to resist it. So this exactly proves the revolutionary nature and the progressiveness of feminism, as well as the power of this challenge and its subversive nature. So I feel that this is very normal. Very normal. The implications of this kind of societal progress and this kind of cultural transformation is that many people must give up their benefits. No matter what, no one willingly gives up benefits, which range from small things such as family relationships and gender relationships to big things like the country. So this is very normal. As for me, I will not abandon my goals because of these kinds of obstacles and resistance. Rather, I think that the very existence of this kind of resistance clearly indicates that feminism is valuable.
有形的和无形的，没有人是会愿意自觉自愿的放弃利益的，小到家庭、男女关系，大到国家，所以非常正常。那么，作为我个人，我不会因为遇到这种阻力而放弃，而且我觉得恰恰是因为有这种阻力，才说明它有价值。
Then, do we need to localize Western feminism?
I discussed this in the beginning of this interview. I do not think this is necessary. Cultural and spiritual resources should not be categorized into different regions, countries, or ethnicities. My standard for judgment is to see whether it suits my needs or not. I am a free person. I have dignity. I have a valuable life. This is what I firmly believe about myself. So to decide what kind of theory or ism to embrace, I ask whether it is a kind of liberating power or a kind of suppressive power. If you can set me free, liberate me, allow me to realize my value regardless of whether it is Westerner or Chinese, I will embrace it.
This is 那么我去拥抱哪一个理论，或者拥抱哪一种主义，我是看它对我追求我的这种价值是一种解放的力量，还是一种压制的力量。如果它是能够释放我、解放我，让我实现我的这种价值的话，我不管它是西方的还是东方的，我都会拥抱。
I definitely would not reject feminism because it is Western.
而且
Moreover, it is beneficial to my own individual pursuits. It is consistent with my values. Why would I want to give it up simply because it is Western? So in this sense, I do not think there is an issue of localizing feminism. I believe that a hope for the future existence of the human race exists, and we share a most basic humanity. I definitely do not believe that some people innately tend to embrace oppression, inequality, and hierarchy, self-negativity, and self-rejection.
放弃它。所以从这个意义上来说，我觉得也不存在着把它本土化的问题。我 觉得我们就是人类的一个今后的一个存在的一个希望，也是在于我们有共同的最基本的人性。我绝不相信有的人他会天然的去拥抱压迫、不平等、等级制和自我否定、自我排斥。有这样的人，他去主动的去拥抱东方的这种专制主义和这种等级文化的话，是因为他已经被这种专制和等级文化
His choice for despotism and culture of hierarchy only comes when he is in a situation where there are no choices. Many people do not know that they do not have options. I want to have choices. Moreover, I am the subject of my own choice. So I cannot restrict my own choices because I have dignity. I hope that this kind of choice is completely autonomous. 很多人他不知道他自己没有选择。我觉得我希望得到选择，而且我自己是选择的主体。所以我不限制我自己的选择，因为我是一个有尊严的人，我希望这种选择是我 I believe that Chinese feminism faces the problem that it must consciously unearth its own resources and summarize its own thoughts and spiritual value. What I cannot agree with is that before we find out what we ourselves have, we blindly reject any outside resources. But I also feel that it is very important for us to actively work on our own cultural resources and spiritual resources.
我不能认同的是，在你不做这个工作的前提下，去盲目的排斥谁。但是我也觉得去梳理我们自己本土的这个文化资源和精神资源是非常重要的。但是现在这个工作并没有人在扎扎实实的做，而是更多的人把这个精力放在了我要去否定别人。
Let me do a comparison. Currently, I have experienced my own country's values as oppressive and exploitative. Do some theorizing, and like the Western theories have done, show me a systematic and rich theoretical resources. Allow me to choose. Of course, I will choose the one that's better for me. The problem is that people have not done any of these things, yet they still negate others. Moreover, other people have spent 200 years developing such a cultural asset, spiritual asset, and intellectual asset. Why do we want to negate this only because it is Western? Is this an honest conclusion? Is this an honest process? Is it a rational process?
这个文化财产、文化财富、精神财富、思想财富，我们为什么就仅仅是因为它是西方的，我们就要否定它？这是一个诚实的结论吗？这是一个诚实的过程吗？是一个理性的过程吗？这是我要质疑的。
They cannot restrict me with their label of nation,
我认
culture,
为那是
or
不理性的过
territory.
程。
I feel that I am pursuing or embracing certain kind of ideas according to my
因为
essential
我
needs
是
for
理
life.
性的，我觉得。而且我是自主的，我是有尊严的，而且我是自由的。这种自由就包括我不希望任何人来限制我的选择，而且任何人不要在我面前贴标签。 仅仅是因为民族的这个文化的或者地域的东西来限制我，我觉得我是用我的生命的一种本质来追求某种东西或拥抱某种东西。
As you have gone through this process, how would you evaluate yourself?
I feel I'm very
我觉
happy.
得我很幸
I
福，
feel I'm very happy.
我
Become
觉得
more
我很
feminist
幸福，
made you very happy.
很幸福，
Very happy. I'm
我
extremely
非常
happy.
幸福。
It's like I
就是
said,
还
I'm
是这
free,
个，我觉
and
得
no
很
one can
自由
restrict
啊，
me.
没有人可以
This
限制
freedom
我。
includes having a free
这
body
种
and a
自
free
由是
spirit.
我身体的自由，
Moreover, I am
我精神的
autonomous.
自由。
No one can make me No one can
而且
violate my
我是
will
自
and
主
force me to
的，
do something.
没
I
有
have the
人
ability to be autonomous.
可以
Things that I do are
来
all things that I am
让
willing to
我
do
做
and that
的，
I
就是
want to do.
没有人可以违反我的意志让我做什么，就是我有自主的这个能力，我做的事情都是我愿意做的，是我想做的。
就这种推动的过程，您说在整个中国这个，
我只是说我刚才说的是我个人层面啊，
对，
个人生活层面。
就是推动这个整个的中国的这种女权运动，
How do you see
这个
yourself?
过程当中，您怎么评价您自己？
沧海一粟了，我这个我觉得没有什么太多的
I
评
do
价，
not
只是一
think
个
too
积极
much
的
about
参与者。
myself. I am
我
just an
更
active
大的是
participant.
我是受益
I am
者。
even more a beneficiary. I am first a
我首先
beneficiary.
定位于我自己是个受益者，我的受益是
My
我被
benefits
解
are
放
that I
出来
was
的，
liberated. Then,
然后
because I
因为
received
我受益
benefits,
了，
I
所以我才参
participated
与，
and became a
是个参
participant.
与者。